Chapter 1486. The head of the Tokyo branch of the History Compilation Committee, the next head of the House of Saya. Noah sat down and looked at Saya Miyazaki curiously. So, you are the future leader of the Japanese spell community? In the past, the House of Saya was the one who won the power struggle among the four major families. The founder of the History Compilation Committee was also the previous head of the House of Saya. As the next head of the House of Saya, it was only a matter of time before Saya Miyazaki became the head of the History Compilation Committee and the leader of the entire Japanese spell community. Toward this, Saya Gong Exian said with an indifferent attitude. Actually, if possible, I don't want to become famous by inheriting the family business. I want to go out and do things on my own. Saya Miyazaki said to Noah in a half-joking, half-serious tone. Lord Noah seems to be very close to our witch Yuan. Why don't you stay here and let me work under you? Let's build a force bigger than the History Compilation Committee. Hearing this, Noah was somewhat speechless. Not only Noah, but Alice and Yerek also looked at Saya Miyazaki, speechless. After all, the History Compilation Committee was a force established by the House of Saya. As the next head of the Shai Gong family, it was one thing for Shai Gong Exian to want to establish her own family, but she actually wanted to replace her family's power. For this reason, she did not hesitate to rope in the demon king who killed a god, making everyone speechless. She seems to be a brave person. Yerek said with a sigh. This reminds me of the time when I first became a godslayer. There was a little girl who hadn't even reached adulthood who made a declaration in front of me, asking me to join her. In the end, I rejected her, and since then, she has been at odds with me. That's an unpleasant memory. Indeed. Alice also sighed. I also remember when I learned all the knowledge of druids. A man who claimed to be completely different from the rest of his kind barged into my house and said to me, I need your wisdom. If you help me, I might be able to pay you. After I rejected him, he started to target me everywhere. After saying that, Alice and Yerek looked at each other, their eyes showing extreme disgust for each other. The corners of Noah's mouth twitched. He was speechless once again. So this was how the enmity between the two of them started? Noah really wanted to say something. Are the two of you children? On the other hand, Saya Gongshin had an interesting expression. So there is such a grudge between the Black Prince and the White Princess. Fortunately, I came, or else I wouldn't have known about such an interesting past. Noah needed to correct his thoughts. Among the people here, there weren't only two children. There were three of them. Noah felt that there would be no end to this, so he said to Saya Gongshin directly. Are you here because of the request I made to the History Compilation Committee? Before Erica, Yoli, Liliana, and Kira went to the location of the last king to deliver the items to Noah, Noah called Gonchi Winterhorse and made a request. I heard about that request from Mr. Gonchi. Saya Gongshin looked at Noah and said. I remember that Master Noah asked the History Compilation Committee to find a spacious and uninhabited place for you to use as a battlefield, right? That's right. Noah nodded. I'm sure the History Compilation Committee already knows about the current situation. We need to deal with a few troublesome enemies. For this, we need to make some preparations. The location isn't a problem. We'll arrange it as soon as possible. Saya Gongshin's smile faded bit by bit. However, we also found some troublesome situations here. Troublesome situations? Noah was slightly taken aback. Troublesome situations? Yerek was also taken aback. Only Alice seemed to have thought of something and looked at Saya Gongshin. Are you referring to the changes in the volcanic area? Alice's words made everyone's eyes focus on her. What? Saya Gongshin was a little surprised. Miss Alice, do you already know? Spirit vision was activated just now, and I saw some scenes. Alice looked around at the people present. I'll show you the scenes with the elf sensing ability. Alice closed her eyes as soon as she finished speaking, and dense spell power surged out of her body. A dazzling white light flashed out of Alice's body and filled the entire VIP room. Then, in the next moment, the entire VIP room seemed to have been replaced by something else, and it changed. The scene that appeared in front of them made everyone's expression turn solemn. First, Noah and the rest saw a mountain. It was a very famous mountain in Japan, known as the spiritual peak, Mount Fuji. This #1 mountain that was known to everyone in the country had actually erupted. Flames and black smoke kept spewing out of the crater. Boiling lava flowed down the mountain and flowed to the ground. Huge rocks exploded and smashed in all directions. Vaguely, they could even see that some distance away from Mount Fuji, where the explosion occurred, people as small as ants were fleeing in panic. It was very noisy. At this moment, the scene around them changed completely and turned into another place. This time, it was a mountain range of unknown origins. The mountain range seemed to be a volcanic area as well. Moreover, the craters of each of them were erupting, causing red flames to soar into the sky. Thick black smoke filled the air, and even the ground shook slightly. Under such circumstances, the surrounding scene seemed to be moving closer to the sky, making the volcanic area below become smaller and smaller, showing a broader scene of the earth. However, the scene that appeared made them speechless. There was the scene of volcanic ash covering the entire sky, causing the nearby cities to be covered with black smoke. There was the scene of cities being eroded by the hot lava and gradually being destroyed. There was the scene of hot rocks falling from the sky like raindrops smashing the buildings one by one. There was the scene of dark clouds condensed from the thick volcanic ash spreading to the surrounding sky little by little. There were only 4 words to describe these scenes. The end of the world. It was a terrible scene, as if the end of the world had come. After an unknown period of time, the doomsday scene began to disappear slowly, and the VIP room returned to its original state. These are not just scenes that are currently happening, some of them are scenes of the future after my spirit vision was triggered. Alice let out a soft sigh and pulled herself together. She explained with an unprecedentedly serious expression. I think, if the last king continues to move in this world, those scenes will really happen, right? Our official history compilation committee also received a lot of reports of volcanic eruptions and even changes in the Earth's crust, Sayaka Gong Xian continued. Now, in this country, a lot of volcanoes are showing signs of eruption, and even some extinct volcanoes seem to be showing signs of revival. If the same thing happens in other countries, then, without a doubt, this will be a world-class crisis. Noah and Yerek suddenly frowned. The last king to appear in the apocalypse. Yerek muttered something. I see, is this the meaning of the title, Last King? It seemed that Yerek knew who the culprit behind the changes in the world was. Sure enough, this is related to the troublesome enemies you mentioned. Sayaka Gong Xian sighed, then looked up and looked at Noah and Yerek. Can we ask you two for help? Noah and Yerek suddenly looked at each other, then smiled faintly at the same time. Chapter 1487. About half an hour later, Sayamiya left the hotel with the winter horse. As the head of the Tokyo branch of the History Compilation Committee, as well as the next head of the Sayamiya family and the future general of the committee, Sayamiya said that no matter what, the entire Japanese spell community would fully support Noah and Yerek. If they did not do so, the History Compilation Committee would not be able to cope with this disaster. This also showed why the humans in the world today needed the Godslayers. Because, other than the Godslayers, there was no existence that could resist the gods and protect the humans and the world from the gods. Therefore, humans worshipped the Godslayers as kings. Even if it was a demon king who could bring great terror, it was the same. As the only two Godslayers who were still alive with their heads, Noah and Yerek both expressed their feelings about this situation, but they were not surprised by it. After all, as kings, they had encountered the same situation many times. In any case, with the full support of the forces that secretly controlled everything in this country, for Noah and Yerek, it was a great help. At least, the problem of the venue was solved. Before she planned to visit Noah and Yerek, Sayamiya followed Noah's instructions and sent someone to prepare the venue. By the time Sayagong Xian left the hotel with the winter horse, the venue had already been prepared. Under such circumstances, Yerek directly left the hotel and went to the well-prepared venue. There were only two reasons why a venue was needed for the battle with the hero who annihilated the Demon King. First, to prevent the battle from affecting innocent people and causing casualties. Especially this time. The opponent was the savior who could use a divine sword that could even cut a star. He was someone who could sink an island and pierce through the sea and the earth with one strike. If the venue was not prepared, it would cause a lot of casualties. Second, for Yerek. Unlike the other God-slayers, Yerek was not very good at direct confrontation. If Yerek was given enough time and conditions to prepare, this God-slayer would be able to display a combat power that no one could ignore. In order to deal with Lancelot and the masked wind god, Yerek had to be fully prepared. Otherwise, even a God-slayer would be in danger when facing two disobedient gods at the same time. Because of this, Noah proposed to the official history compilation committee to prepare a venue. Now that the venue was ready, Yerek naturally had to leave and make preparations. It was estimated that this night, everyone would be so busy that they would not even have time to sleep. Of course, this did not include Noah. Noah had finished what he needed to do. Now, Noah only had one mission. That was to wait for the arrival of dawn. As dawn approached, Erica, Yoli, Liliana, and Huina finally came back. As soon as she entered the room, Erica threw out such a sentence. "I've already given your item to that Lord Hero." "I think so too," Noah replied without any surprise. If that wasn't the case, that guy would have probably killed his way into the city and searched everywhere for me and Yerek, right? Now, the hero of Saber, Lancelot, and the masked wind god are all on standby in the outskirts of the mountains, Liliana said with a serious expression. "I think they'll wait until dawn before heading to the designated location for the duel, right?" "That would be best." Noah shrugged and looked out the window at the sky that was beginning to brighten. "As long as they can wait until dawn, then I'll be fully prepared." Erica, Yoli, Liliana, and Huina exchanged glances with each other. Although they did not know why Noah had to wait until dawn, it was tactful not to ask at this time. Moreover, the group of girls could more or less guess the reason why Noah had to wait until dawn to take action. In fact, it was not difficult to guess. The North American God Slayer, John Pluto Smith, had the power called super transformation. It was a power that allowed people to transform into various forms and use various incarnations. However, every time an incarnation was used, a corresponding sacrifice had to be offered. Otherwise, this power could not be activated. Not only that, after an incarnation was used, the incarnation could not be used again for 7 days. This kind of power that allowed one to use various abilities and incarnations generally had very strict usage time and conditions. Noah had once defeated the undefeated god of victory, Welslana, who had 10 incarnations and was invincible with diverse abilities. Therefore, if Noah was like the North American God Slayer and seized the power to use various abilities and incarnations from a god, then it was not strange that this power had strict usage conditions. Perhaps, among them, there were incarnations that could only be used after dawn? This was the thought of the girls. Although this idea wasn't completely correct, it was still a vague guess. Although Noah's power of 10 incarnations did not have any usage time or conditions, it did require him to wait until dawn to use it. Otherwise, if he used it without authorization, it would bring about some bad effects to this world. Of course, the girls did not know about these things, but they did not ask. This included Erica and Liliana, who had been following Noah for a long time. Only Yoli stepped forward slightly and came in front of Noah. She solemnly handed the scabbard that she had been holding in her arms to Noah. "This is returned to its rightful owner." Noah was slightly stunned. Looking at the Avalon that Yoli handed to him with a solemn expression, he did not take it. Instead, he looked directly at Yoli. "Compared to me, you need the protection of this scabbard more. Take it with you." "No, King." Huina shook her head. "The one who needs to use this incredible scabbard is the king. Huina and the others no longer need it." This sentence stunned Noah at first, but then he reacted. In other words, you won't be coming with me to the battle with the last king, right? That's a bit wrong, Erica corrected him. To put it simply, we can't go with you. Can't? Noah frowned and turned his gaze to Liliana. His eyes were full of curiosity. Now, the volcanic areas around the world have begun to mutate. The temperature of the sea and the earth is gradually rising. Even the temperature has begun to gradually increase. Soon, I'm afraid it will become a world-class disaster, Liliana explained. According to what you said, the appearance of the last king has caused the aura of fire and wind in the world to begin to increase. Therefore, in order to prevent the disaster from happening, all the magic associations in Europe are gathering members and preparing to hold a big ceremony to calm the aura of fire and wind. It's not just Europe. The History Compilation Committee has also issued a summons, preparing to gather all the witches and cursemancers in Japan to calm the spiritual energy of the earth and sea. Yuri said with a sense of mission. Although I don't know how much the aura of fire and wind can be suppressed by doing this, at least it can delay the arrival of the apocalypse. Is that so? Noah sighed. In other words, all of you have been summoned? There's nothing we can do about it. Liliana also sighed, which was rare. Although as a knight, it's absolutely unforgivable for the king to go to the battlefield alone, at the same time, it's not the right behavior of a knight to sit back and ignore the danger of others. Considering the issue of time, we won't return to Italy. Instead, we're preparing to hold the ceremony here with the History Compilation Committee. Erica looked at Noah. After all, this is a crisis of the world. The magic associations around the world must cooperate to calm the turmoil of the earth and sea together. On the contrary, this is the only thing that Hui Na and the others can do, Hui Na said to Noah with a smile. The only person who can really save the world is the king. Noah fell silent. Then, he suddenly smiled. Leave it to me. The group of girls revealed extremely beautiful smiles that lasted for a long time. Chapter 1488. Just like that, dawn gradually arrived. In order to cooperate with the people of the Japanese magic circle to carry out the wind and fire aura calming ceremony, Erica, Yuri, Liliana, and Kei-na all returned to their respective rooms in the hotel to prepare. According to Alice, after dawn, magic associations in various countries around the world would begin to hold calming ceremonies to control the aura of wind and fire. This was an unprecedented ceremony. Through the Sage Parliament, a neutral force that specialized in the study of God's layers, every force around the world discussed to hold a ceremony at the same time, combining the power of all magicians and cursemancers in the world to calm the aura of wind and fire. Only in this way could the increase of aura be maximized. If each country, each force, and each organization did their own thing and held the ceremony on their own, it would only reduce the aura of an area. Just like water would flow to a lower place. Even if the aura of an area was reduced, the aura of other places would be replenished. In that case, the problem would not be solved at all. Therefore, through the Sage Parliament, a research force that did not belong to any party, all the forces around the world unanimously agreed that they must combine the power of all the forces in the world to hold a world-class ceremony together. Otherwise, the suppression of aura would not be carried out at all. But a world-class ceremony? That would definitely be an unprecedented ceremony, right? After all, the scope of effect was aimed at the whole world, and even the organizers of the ceremony were all forces in the world. Such a super large-scale ceremony was definitely something that had never been done before. In this regard, Alice, the girl who loved to join in the fun and was eager to see the world in chaos, was the most excited. A world-class large-scale ceremony. Such a ceremony, let alone in the past, I don't even know if it will appear in the future. Whether the last king eventually falls into a deep sleep because he annihilates all the demon kings, or you defeat the last king and make the apocalypse disappear, after dawn, this ceremony will be recorded in the history books and become an eternal legend in the magic world. After leaving this sentence, Alice left the hotel. Next, Alice would return to London, England, to preside over the overall situation of this ceremony. There was no other way. How could such a grand ceremony on a worldwide scale be held just like that? Disregarding everything else, cooperation alone was a huge problem. Don't forget, the people who held the ceremony this time were from all corners of the world. Since they wanted to hold the ceremony together, they naturally had to cooperate with each other, divide the work, and figure out the timing of the ceremony. They also had to improvise. It was impossible to complete an unprecedented large-scale ceremony just by doing their own thing. Therefore, Alice's existence would become the center of this large-scale ceremony on a worldwide scale. Before the start of the ceremony, Alice would use her mental senses to connect the minds of all magicians and cursemancers in the world who intended to perform the ceremony. This way, everyone would be able to know each other's situation and cooperate with each other to hold the ceremony together. This was also the reason why Alice was so excited. If one were to say that this unprecedented world-scale ritual would go down in history and become a legend, then Alice, as the center of it all, would go down in history as a legend in the world of magic and spells. In the future, whenever someone mentioned this ceremony, they would definitely think of who was the center of this ceremony. In view of this, after tomorrow, Alice would probably become the princess of the world, not just the princess of Europe. For Alice, who loved to join in the fun, this was definitely something worth participating in. She would definitely say that this was very interesting. Of course, although Alice was known as the Witch of Europe and was known as the princess, she was still just an ordinary human. It was simply impossible to connect the minds of all the people in the world with her mental senses. However, Noah had once given Alice protection to protect the princess's health. The power of the protection would allow Alice to obtain a healthy body that could be counted in years. Now, Alice was ready to release all the protection that Noah had given her in one go, so that her mental senses would be greatly improved. In this way, Alice could connect the minds of all the people in the world. This made Noah understand one thing. This time, he wasn't the only one fighting against the last king. Although only Noah and Yerek were directly involved in the battle, all the magicians and cursemancers in the world would hold a ceremony after dawn to increase the aura of fire and wind to prevent the arrival of the apocalypse. Noah was fighting. Magicians and cursemancers from all over the world were also fighting. This would be a battle that combined the power of everyone in the world of magic and cursemancers. When he thought of this, Noah finally felt a sense of heaviness accumulating on his shoulders. That sense of heaviness was called responsibility. Noah, for the first time, had the feeling of carrying the hopes of all the people in the world in a battle. With this indescribable feeling, Noah unknowingly came to Yoli and Huina's room. Looking at the door in front of him, Noah was silent for a long time, then he reached out and knocked on the door. After the door was knocked, Huey's loud voice rang out. "Come in." Hearing this, Noah directly opened the door and walked into Yoli and Huina's room. "Mr. Noah?" "King." Yoli and Huina didn't seem to expect that the person who came was Noah, so they were a little surprised. Noah found that the two witches were completely different from before. At this moment, Yoli wasn't wearing her usual witch costume, and Huina wasn't wearing her usual uniform either. Instead, she was wearing a white shirt and trousers, as well as a thin coat with pine and crane patterns. It was a costume called Chahaya. Under normal circumstances, this was a formal dress that could only be worn during ceremonies, dances, or weddings. Moreover, it was a dress that could only be worn by the witches who worked in the same profession. The part-time witches who were temporarily recruited were not allowed to wear it. Dressed in such a sacred atmosphere, Yoli and Huina also wore gorgeous crowns and hairpins on their heads, and their waist-length hair was extremely soft and smooth on their slender backs. They were dressed very solemnly and conspicuously. That rare solemn and gorgeous costume, coupled with the outstanding appearance of the two girls, was simply like a goddess descending to the earth, very beautiful. Looking at the solemn and gorgeous appearance of the two girls, Noah smiled slightly. "It seems that you are all ready." It said to be ready, but Huina and Yoli just changed into formal clothes. Huina, as usual, showed a smile without any scheming. Later, Exian will send someone to pick up Huina and Yoli and go to the place where the ceremony will be held. "So, we are preparing to say goodbye to Mr. Noah." Yoli was like a gentle woman, smiling reservedly. "I didn't expect Mr. Noah to come here first." Is that so? Noah smiled bitterly, then immediately looked at Yoli and Huina. Actually, I'm also here to apologize to you. Noah's words made Yoli and Huina stunned at the same time. Apologize? Huina said strangely. Why is the king apologizing? Although Yoli didn't say anything, she also had a confused look. Obviously, she didn't understand why Noah suddenly apologized. Looking at the pretty faces of the two Yuan witches, Noah scratched his cheek. You originally had your own peaceful lives, but that kind of life was ruthlessly broken after I came to this country. I am really very sorry. Hearing Noah's words, Yoli and Huina suddenly looked at each other. However, that was Noah's heartfelt words. Noah really felt sorry for these two girls. Especially Yoli. This girl had been nothing more than a witch guarding a small shrine. Although her spirit vision ability was quite outstanding, her other aspects were only average. Such a girl, let alone being sent to solve a world-class crisis, even some dangerous missions were not fated with her. However, after Yoli rescued Noah from the woods, this girl's peaceful life was completely broken, and she even encountered crises repeatedly. How could Noah not apologize properly? Chapter 1489. In fact, the time that Noah and Yoli had known each other was pathetically short. After all, Noah's adaptation time in this world was only 7 days. In other words, it had only been 7 days since Noah had returned to this world. Naturally, Noah and Yoli had only known each other for 7 days. However, a lot of things had happened in these 7 days. First, the God Slayer had come to this country. Then, the great sage equaling heaven, who had been imprisoned by the elders of the secluded world, had escaped. Later, Luohao, Athena, Yerek, Guinevere, Lancelot, and other supernatural beings beyond the reach of human beings had appeared one after another in this island country, causing great chaos one after another. Now, even the last king, who had only appeared in the apocalypse but would also bring about the end of the world, had ushered in the awakening, causing a disaster to the world that could not be ignored. 7 days ago, she was only guarding a small shrine, and this was too much for her to bear. 7 days ago, she had only been guarding a small shrine. Noah even remembered that 7 days ago, when he had just gotten to know Yoli, this young girl's attitude towards him was filled with reverence and extreme fear. Later, Noah learned from Kantorai that in the past, because of war ban, Yoli had a very unpleasant experience, which led to an excessive fear of the God Slayer. However, even so, despite knowing that Noah was a God Slayer and was seriously injured, Yuli still didn't choose to sit back and do nothing. Instead, he rescued Noah. Undoubtedly, she was so afraid of the God Slayer and undoubtedly worried that the Demon King would harm this country. Yoli did not leave Noah to fend for himself and brought Noah home. There was no doubt that this was a very kind girl. It was because of this that Noah had made an agreement with Yoli. As long as Yoli listened to him obediently, he would also listen to her obediently. Then, he would allow the official history compilation committee to arrange an attendant for him. On the surface, it was to be responsible for guarding, but in fact, it was to monitor. Unfortunately, life was unpredictable. When he was in Hidden World, because he didn't have to worry about causing any harm to the human world, Noah directly vented his dissatisfaction to Susanoo and the other elders of Hidden World, directly fighting them. As a result, this fight gave rise to a series of butterfly effects. First, Great Sage equaling Heaven's curse was split by Noah's sword. Furthermore, because the Great Sage equaling Heaven had escaped, Guinevere had also been lured over. If Guinevere had not been lured here, then the whereabouts of the last king would not have been discovered. If his whereabouts were not discovered, then the last king would not have been awakened and brought about a world-class crisis. What's more, in addition to the matter of the last king, Noah and Athena's ill-fated relationship has more or less affected the island. If that's the case, the reason for the current situation can be attributed to me. Noah looked at Yuli with mixed feelings. Undoubtedly, I made an agreement with you, but it still caused such a big mess. I have repeatedly put you in danger. I'm really sorry. After saying that, Noah looked at Hui Na and said sincerely, thank you. And you, Hui Na, I also have to apologize to you. Not only did I disrupt your cultivation, but I also brought you a lot of trouble. I can only apologize to you. Please forgive me. Yuli and Hui Na, who were originally looking at each other, gradually fell silent. After a while, Yuli suddenly spoke. Indeed, Mr. Noah has caused so many disputes and disturbances. I have a lot to say to you. With such a sentence, Yuli changed the topic and looked at Noah with a gentle expression. However, although the time we spent together is very short, I have already understood what kind of person Mr. Noah is. Is that so? Noah couldn't help but laugh. Then in your eyes, what kind of person am I? To put it simply, you are a person who will be very rational when it's time to be rational, but also very impulsive when it's time to be impulsive. You will help those who are helpless, but you will also cause trouble for others, making people grateful and angry at the same time. Yuli said so in a gentle tone. So, for such a Mr. Noah, I do have a lot to say to you, but I don't have time now. Hearing Yuli's words, Noah couldn't help but be startled, and then he immediately understood what Yuli meant. Mr. Noah, please defeat the last king, save this world, save my country, and then return to me in one piece. Yuli's gaze went straight to Noah, and a pair of eyes flashed with waves of emotions. At that time, I will tell you everything I want to say. There was only one meaning in Yuli's words. Don't die. This was the feeling that Yuli wanted to express. Me too, Your Majesty. Hui Na hurriedly said, with the usual innocent smile on her face. To be honest, Hui Na doesn't know why Your Majesty is apologizing. Hui Na doesn't think that Your Majesty did anything wrong. Your Majesty asked Hui Na to come out of the mountains and be Your Majesty's follower. Hui Na is actually very happy because she doesn't feel bored at all by Your Majesty's side. Hui Na likes the feeling of being by Your Majesty's side. After saying that, Hui Na smiled shyly. So, Hui Na also hopes that Your Majesty won't lose to the last king and come back alive. Then, this time, Hui Na hopes to be Your Majesty's true follower, not a temporary guard. The words from the heart made Noah stare blankly at the pretty faces of the two Yuan witches. After a while, he finally relaxed and smiled helplessly. Since you all said so, it seems that I really can't lose. With a helpless smile, Noah extended his hand to Yuli and Hui Na. Then, I promise you that I will definitely come back victorious. At that time, please give me a lot of advice. Seeing Noah extend his hand to the two of them, Yuli and Hui Na both smiled shyly, but without hesitation, they also extended their hand and placed it on the back of Noah's hand. You must abide by the agreement this time. Yuli said with extreme sincerity. If, this time, Mr. Noah doesn't keep his promise with me, then I will definitely not forgive you. Hui Na is the same. Hui Na said straightforwardly. Your Majesty, when you come back, take Hui Na to various places to play. Noah nodded heavily and looked at the two Yuan witches with a smile. At this moment, a hand suddenly reached out and overlapped the hands of Noah, Yuli, and Hui Na. Since you plan to bring your entourage along, there's no reason for you not to bring me, Erica Browntree, right? Erica, who had appeared out of nowhere, turned around and looked at Noah with a confident smile that was as gorgeous as her signature smile. This is the first time I've taken the initiative to respond positively to a man's invitation for a date. You should be honored, Your Majesty. As soon as Erica said that, another hand suddenly reached out from the side and overlapped the hands of the group. It's unforgivable for a knight to not be able to go to the battlefield with Your Majesty. Liliana, who also appeared out of nowhere, looked straight at Noah and said in an unquestionable tone. But this time, it's a special situation and there's no other choice. Next time, no matter where you go, Liliana Kranikar will go with you. Please don't forget about me, your knight, Your Majesty. You. Noah stared in astonishment at Erica and Liliana who appeared out of nowhere. He opened his mouth and was about to say something when he understood what was going on. Yes. That's right. Erica Browntree and Liliana Kranjkar were his knights. He didn't need to speak much with his knights. Just like in the past, everything was in silence. They trusted each other, worked hard, and waited for the delayed reunion. That was enough. At this thought, Noah swept his gaze across the faces of Erica, Yuli, Liliana, and Huina. He exchanged gazes with the four young ladies and nodded firmly. The sun gradually rose in the warm atmosphere and illuminated the land. Chapter 1490. Following the rise of the sun, the warm sunlight sprinkled down from the sky, illuminating the entire earth. It was now autumn. Until yesterday, the weather was still somewhat cool. Therefore, the warm sunlight in the morning undoubtedly brought a comfortable feeling and warmed one's body and mind. However, this situation did not occur today. He didn't know if there was a mistake somewhere. Undoubtedly, yesterday's temperature was still quite low, bringing a cool feeling. Today, the temperature was unusually high. In terms of temperature, yesterday was only 11 or 12 degrees Celsius, but today, the temperature was at least 34 or 35 degrees Celsius. Under such circumstances, in a desolate suburb, two figures were exposed to the sun's merciless heat, standing against the wind, as if waiting for something. Those two figures were Noah and Yerek. Two young men of about the same age stood under the sun. They didn't care about the sunlight at all. Their eyes were closed, and they didn't say a single word. It wasn't until a certain moment that their eyelids trembled slightly, and they slowly opened their eyes. When they opened their eyes, both Noah and Yerek saw it. In front of them, a few figures were slowly walking towards them with clear footsteps. If those figures were walking on the street, they would definitely attract everyone's attention in an instant, right? There was no other reason. No matter how one looked at it, the three of them were too conspicuous. One was wearing a full body armor that covered his entire body. One was wrapped in white bandages all over his body and wore a mask. The remaining one looked relatively normal, but on his back was an indescribable sword that exuded an indescribable aura. His presence was even stronger than the other two. These three people stepped on the ground, and amidst the sound of unhurried footsteps, they walked to a place not far from Noah and Yerek and stopped. Whoosh! A gust of hot wind suddenly blew past, stirring up a gust of wind and sand. Noah looked at the warrior with the long sword on his back, his eyes flashing slightly. He didn't need to look to know that Yerek was also looking at the hero with the long sword on his back. Although the knight in full armor and the strange man in the mask had an aura that couldn't be ignored, they paled in comparison to the hero with a sword on his back. The aura emanating from the hero with the long sword on his back gave people the illusion that he was abnormally tall and big. Feeling that kind of aura, Noah no longer had the spare energy to pay attention to Lancelot and the masked wind god, let alone Yerek. Therefore, Yerek chose to remain silent, sizing up the hero with his gaze. Lancelot and the masked wind god, who were following the hero, remained silent as well, giving the right to speak to their master. Because of this, Noah and the hero's eyes met. Unexpectedly, the first to speak was the hero. To be honest, I'm very surprised, the hero said to Noah in a voice that made people feel comfortable. Although I've met many god slayers and fought many life and death battles with them, this is the first time I've received a letter of challenge. Yes. A letter of challenge. Noah had asked Erica, Yuri, Liliana, and Huina to deliver a letter of challenge to the hero who had annihilated the Demon King. The form of the letter of challenge was unusually simple. It only stated the time and place of the battle. Because Noah had issued a letter of challenge to the hero, he had stayed outside the city obediently and waited for the battle to begin. I'm also very surprised. Noah glanced at the hero. I didn't expect you to accept my letter of challenge. I thought you would ignore everything around you and wave your divine sword at me like you did on the invisible island. Hearing this, the hero revealed a tired and bitter smile. He lowered his head and apologized to Noah. At that time, I had just woken up, but I wasn't happy about it. Instead, I was in a bad mood, so I acted rudely. Please forgive me. Seeing that the hero had lowered his head and apologized sincerely, not only Noah, but even Yerek was stunned. You. Noah looked at the hero and said with some uncertainty, "Are you really the god of disobedience?" If someone who didn't know the truth heard Noah's words, they would definitely think that he was asking the obvious. After all, the only gods who could wander freely on earth were the gods of disobedience who had deviated from the myths. However, Yerek felt that Noah's question was reasonable. This was because the hero in front of him really didn't fit the image of the god of disobedience. Because the god of disobedience had deviated from the myths and appeared on earth without permission, he would be devoured by the madness and become violent. Regardless of whether it was Velislana, who was known as the protector of the people, or Athena, who was the goddess of wisdom, there were no exceptions. However, the hero's words and actions didn't have any arrogance. Instead, he gave people a feeling of gentleness and seriousness, making people want to love and respect him. This feeling really didn't fit the temperament of the god of disobedience. The hero seemed to understand why Noah had such a question and couldn't help but shake his head. "It's not strange that you would have such a question, but I am indeed a god of disobedience. Only by becoming a god of disobedience can a god freely wander on earth. This is a law that even the gods can't defy, and I am no exception." "Then why do you look so rational?" Yerek couldn't help but ask. "Until now, none of the gods of disobedience we've met have been as rational and steady as you." Hearing Yerek's words, the hero's expression became a little sad as he said this. "Because there is someone who has taken my place and endured all the distortions of the god of disobedience." As the hero spoke, a black shadow slowly appeared behind him. Like smoke, it kept twisting and turning. "That is..." Yerek narrowed his eyes. "A god of disobedience?" "You guessed right." The hero smiled tiredly. "This is a family member who has deep feelings for me. My brother who appeared as my god of disobedience took my place and endured all the distortions and arrogance of being a god of disobedience. Therefore, my essence hasn't been changed at all." It was because of this that the hero wasn't like the other gods of disobedience, who had a rather crazy side. It was also because of this that the hero didn't have the battle instinct of the steel hero. Instead, he was tired of the constantly repeating fate of war. Even if the 7 god slayers were born, he didn't want to wake up. This unexpected fact made Noah a little speechless. Even Yerek furrowed his brows tightly as he spoke. "Since your essence hasn't been distorted, then we shouldn't have a reason to fight, right?" "No." The hero shook his head. "Unfortunately, we have to fight." "Why?" Noah asked bluntly. "Because you have a mission to destroy the Demon King? But I don't think you're very keen on this mission. You have a good eye." The hero looked even more tired. "If possible, I also don't want to engage in meaningless battles. For this, I spent almost 1,000 years avoiding the mission to destroy the Demon King and didn't want to wake up. In the end, I was reawakened." As he finished speaking, the hero looked straight at Noah. "Since I've woken up, I have to carry out the mission to destroy the Demon King. Otherwise, I won't be able to fall into a deep sleep again. If I can't fall into a deep sleep and continue to stay on the ground, I'm sure you two already know what will happen." Noah and Yerek fell silent. "If I continue to stay on the ground, when the time comes, the ocean and the land will change. Even the volcanoes will erupt and the sky will collapse. When the fire and wind spirit of this world reach the limit, this world will change and usher in an apocalypse." The hero sighed. "If I want to change this situation, the only way is to fight. Either I destroy all the demon kings on the ground, or I am defeated by the Demon King. There is no other way." As he finished speaking, the hero raised his head and said with a sorrowful and determined expression, "No matter what the result is, I have to fight. So, this is the reason why I have to fight." Chapter 1491. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became extremely heavy. Since ancient times, the gods and the godslayers were natural enemies. No matter what the situation was, both sides would be drawn by fate and meet each other. Godslayers were natural warriors. Disobedient gods viewed godslayers as enemies. Once the two sides met, it would cause all kinds of disputes. This was something that had never changed. However, the battle between gods and godslayers was basically a result of their own will. Yarek had never encountered a god of disobedience like the hero, who didn't want to fight at all but had no choice but to annihilate the enemy with a tired mentality. This way, even the Black Prince, who was known to be good at scheming, did not know how to react to this. Only Noah, after a moment of silence, looked at the hero with a somewhat pitiful gaze. "You are really pitiful." As soon as he said this, an indescribable murderous aura exploded in the room. The masked wind god, who had been quietly following the hero all this time, now exuded an astonishing murderous aura, which shrouded Noah's body. Although there was no way to see the masked wind god's face, everyone present could imagine it. The expression under the wind god's mask was definitely uncontrollable anger. It was the extreme anger that came from feeling that the king he followed was being insulted. This anger turned into a murderous aura that locked onto Noah's aura. Obviously, the masked wind god was very loyal to the hero. On the other hand, Lancelot, who was also a subordinate of the hero, was silent and did not do anything. However, the masked wind god's murderous aura was so strong that it caused the air to become slightly chaotic. Yarek's body instantly tensed up. Noah did not even look at the masked wind god. He only looked at the hero, who had a tired expression on his face, and said flatly, "But I don't think you want me to pity you, right?" "Of course." The hero smiled helplessly. "No matter what, we are both people who will have to pay the price of our lives in this duel. I have my reasons for fighting, and you have yours. If you show mercy to me because of my reasons, it will only increase my sins. But, as you said, I also have my reasons for fighting." Noah looked directly at the hero. "So, I won't show you mercy. That's for the best." The hero seemed to be relieved, and his expression relaxed. "But, as you can see, we have 3 people on our side and only 2 on your side. We are at an absolute disadvantage in terms of numbers. Is that okay?" Hearing this, Noah was about to say something when a light and beautiful voice suddenly sounded in the room. "Since the enemy has prepared enough battle strength, then we will fight back with a battle strength that is 100 or 1,000 times stronger than theirs." When this dignified and extremely light and beautiful voice sounded in the room, a gust of wind swept through the surroundings. Flower petals were mixed in the wind, and a thin veil that looked like a fairy's feather robe was swept up. A slender and beautiful figure slowly appeared from the thin veil like a fairy's feather robe. As if dancing, she spun her body and slowly appeared in front of everyone. Everyone knows that Luozuelian's fists and palms can kill an army of 1,000,000. She alone can defeat 10 million enemies. If you can obtain Luozuelian, you will gain 100 or 1,000 times more combat power. Husband, let this concubine lend you a hand. The newcomer was Luo Hao. You. Noah could not help but be stunned. Why are you here? Today, I have been feeling uneasy on Mount Lu. Because of this, I made a divination and learned that husband has encountered a powerful enemy. Luo Hao took light steps and came to Noah's side. It was as if Noah was the only one in her eyes. She smiled sweetly. Although it is not appropriate for a woman to show her face in public, if you think about it carefully, other than being husband's concubine, Luozuelian is also a valiant and skilled warrior. How could I not help my husband resolve his troubles? The one who reacted to this was not Noah, but the hero. Your Excellency must be one of the current godslayers? The hero looked at Noah and Luo Hao in surprise. So, there's actually a king among the godslayers of the present day? You must be the hero who annihilated the demon king? I can sense an extraordinary aura from you. Luo Hao turned her gaze to the hero. However, your question is foolish. Hero, although I, Luozuelian, am an unparalleled ruler in the world, my husband is a king among kings who can easily subdue the world. I was once defeated by him, yet he took me in as his concubine. Is there something strange about that? Hearing this, Noah really wanted to tell Luo Hao that this was a very strange thing. Why did she have to be taken as his concubine after being defeated by him? Presumably, these were the words that everyone wanted to say, including Noah. However, the hero nodded his head with a relieved expression. I see. Then it is my negligence. Because I have been fighting for so long, I have never seen a godslayer in a relationship. Please forgive me for making a fuss over nothing. The ignorant are not guilty. I forgive you. Luo Hao accepted the hero's apology as if it was a matter of course. However, no matter how many reasons you have for offending my husband, you cannot be forgiven. Hero, if you are not prepared to be cut into pieces by Luo Zuelian, I will absolutely not allow you to point your sword at my husband. The hero smiled when he heard Luo Hao's declaration. It was a hearty smile that was not sad or tired. It was a smile that matched a hero. Just as you said, Your Excellency Luo Zuelian, I have already prepared myself for that. As soon as he finished speaking, an extremely powerful curse power surged from the hero's body and vibrated outwards. The terrifying power of the curse caused the entire world to tremble, as if it was trembling. Both Yerek and Luo Hao's expressions turned grave when they sensed that unparalleled and terrifying curse power. Noah, on the other hand, raised his head and stared at the hero. No. More accurately, he was staring at the sword on the hero's back. Under Noah's gaze, the hero reached out his hand and slowly drew the sword from the scabbard on his back. Clang! An extremely dazzling white gold radiance flickered from the slowly unsheathed sword, illuminating the surroundings. The hero raised the dazzling divine saber high in the air and chanted loudly. Divine saber of salvation, reveal your true face to the world. The dazzling divine saber of salvation suddenly trembled. Immediately after, a mysterious and complicated square magic array suddenly flashed above the divine blade and soared into the sky, rising into the air. During this process, the profound and complicated square magic array rotated as it gradually expanded. By the time it was in the air and seemed to be embedded in the horizon, the square magic array had expanded to about 10 meters on each side. Noah, Luo Hao, and Yerek all raised their heads and looked at the square magic array. They saw that the 10-meter-long square magic array was divided into many small grids. There were weapons and armors in the grids. There were sabers, swords, bows, spears, axes, shields, rods, sabers, spears, cannonballs, rings, blocks that looked like red bricks, and so on. There were probably hundreds of weapons branded in the square magic array's grids, exuding an ancient and sacred aura. That scene reminded Noah of something. Manchala. It was a Japanese magic array with thousands of statues of gods and Buddhas drawn in a geometrical pattern. The Manchala in front of them replaced the sky full of statues of gods and Buddhas with all kinds of weapons. Moreover, those weapons were not ordinary weapons. Noah knew the origins of those weapons better than anyone else. They were god relics that were famous in all kinds of myths and legends. That was right. They were god relics. At that moment, the hero displayed a treasure vault with thousands of god relics. Just like the Gate of Babylon. Chapter 1492. Whiz. The gigantic Manchala formation hovered in midair. The weapons in it vibrated one after another as if they were wild beasts that had just been released from their cages and were ready to attack. Each of the weapons was waiting for the hero's order. As soon as the hero gave the order, the weapons that were famous in all kinds of myths would rain down like a storm, bombarding the ground below indiscriminately. Without a doubt, Luo Hao and Yerek were shocked by such an unexpected method. Thus, the hero explained out of goodwill. In the past, I was given the mission to kill the demon kings by the gods. I've come to the human world as the gods' representative. The hero pointed at the Manchala formation in the sky. In order to help me kill the enemy who killed the gods, not only did the gods in the heavens establish an ancient covenant for me to use, but they also gave me countless weapons to help me complete the mission of killing the demon kings. The Savior Divine Sword is what these weapons look like. Therefore, this is the true form of the Savior Divine Sword. As soon as the hero finished speaking, the Manchala formation in mid-air expanded again. In just an instant, the Manchala Formation that was only 10 meters long expanded to 6 to 7 kilometers long. The number of grids in the formation increased one after another, and god relics appeared in each of the grids. The ancient covenant that can increase my strength according to the number of demon kings that I have killed and the countless god relics that the gods in the heavens have given me are my trump cards to kill all the demon kings on the earth. Following the hero's loud declaration, the Manchala Formation in the sky exploded with lightning all of a sudden. Bang! Amidst the thunderous noise, the god relics in the Manchala Formation were covered by countless lightning bolts one after another. They turned into a rain of lightning and fell on the ground from all directions. The sky was already filled with thunderbolts and torrential rain that blotted out the sky. Everything in sight was covered by the god relics that had turned into lightning bolts one after another. Luo Hao and Yerek's expressions hardened slightly, and their bodies surged with curse power. Just as the two god-slayers were about to unleash their authority, Noah, who was the only one watching calmly as the god relics containing immense god power descended from the sky, finally looked at the hero. "So that's how it is," Noah said as if he had understood something. "Only with the ancient covenant that can elevate one's divine power and the countless god relics given by the gods can a hero kill all the demon kings since the beginning of time. However, it's a pity that your luck is very bad." Noah's eyes flashed with a glint. "You have been raised by the ancient covenant to a level that surpasses that of ordinary gods and god-slayers. You will be surpassed by me, an alien. The countless weapons that the gods of the celestial realm have bestowed upon you will also be surpassed by my collection. Not a single one will be left behind." After saying that, Noah raised a hand. Buzz! As the space vibrated, golden ripples that looked like water waves appeared one after another, filling the entire space behind Noah. Various relics such as sabers, swords, spears, and halberds appeared one after another, imprinting themselves into everyone's eyes. The various relics such as sabers, swords, spears, and halberds carried an ancient aura that was definitely on par with the god relics in the Manchala Formation in the sky. Thus, at this moment, everyone understood. The weapons that appeared from the golden ripples that looked like water waves were also famous god relics that only existed in all sorts of myths. Wah! The hero finally had a change of expression. Impossible. Lancelot was shocked too. Even the masked wind god's body trembled slightly. Clearly, it was extremely shocked. Under such circumstances, sabers, swords, spears, halberds, and all kinds of treasures emerged from the golden ripples and shot out. They turned into beams of light and soared into the sky to welcome the heavenly thunder of salvation that was descending like raindrops. Bang! The relics that had turned into beams collided with the god relics that had turned into lightning. Terrifying sparks were created as if there was an explosion. Bang, 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 bang. Amidst the muffled explosions, the rain of relics and the lightning of god relics that were falling from the sky collided hard. Sparks were created from the impact and spread midair. In the blink of an eye, the entire sky turned into a sea of fire. Dong! At a certain moment, the sea of exploding flames that had expanded to its limit directly exploded, turning the waves of fire into a shockwave. Like a flaming storm, it shook in all directions and even surged downwards like an erupting volcano, shrouding the ground below. Everyone was shocked to see the fire waves that were gushing down midair like waves. If they were hit by the shock waves from the collision between relics and god relics, even if they were gods or god slayers, they would not be able to withstand it with their bodies. At that moment, Luo Hao immediately used divine feat. Yerek released the authority of lightning sparks, Lancelot instantly turned into a cloud of mist, and the masked wind god turned into a tornado, retreating rapidly. Only Noah and the hero did not retreat. Instead, they advanced. "All evildoers, be afraid of my power. Now, I will have the majesty of 10 mountains, the strength of hundreds of rivers, and the strength of thousands of giant dragons. The majestic me will have the ferocious power to slay dragons." Crimson flames rose from Noah's body and turned into scales that covered Noah's entire body. "I will protect myself with the heavenly thunder and lightning. Please bless me with the heavenly thunder." Please bless me with lightning so that I can turn into an immortal steel that can resist all evil in this world." Blue lightning flashed from the hero's body. It turned into lightning and covered the hero's entire body as well. With the crimson flames and blue lightning, the Demon King and the hero charged into the raging fire waves at the same time. Whoosh! As the sound of air breaking echoed in unison, the raging wave of fire that the god-slayers and disobedient gods had chosen to evade was torn apart like a piece of cloth by the crimson aura and the azure lightning. Then, the Demon King and the hero who tore the fire waves apart clenched their fists tightly while the other raised the divine sword in his hand. They charged at each other hard. Kaboom! An earth-shattering rumble was heard. An astonishing shockwave blasted out from the raging fire wave, dispersing the fire wave that was torn apart. Mixed with the shockwave surged in all directions. Among them, 2 figures covered in crimson flames and blue lightning were sent flying backward. They rubbed against the air and shot into the distance like cannonballs. However, the 2 figures that flew out quickly stabilized their bodies. Noah, who was covered in crimson flames, suddenly stopped in midair. He turned into a stream of light and flew into the sky. The hero, who was covered in blue lightning, landed on the ground. He raised his head and looked at Noah, who was soaring into the sky, and stomped on the ground. Bang! As the ground exploded, the hero, who had crushed the ground with his foot, shot up into the sky like a rocket, chasing after Noah as he soared into the sky. The Demon King and the hero both turned into streams of light and disappeared into the clouds in the blink of an eye, like shooting stars chasing each other. Seeing this, Lancelot and the masked wind god, who had returned to their physical bodies from their mist and weathered forms, wanted to chase after them, but they were shot down. Luo Hao, who had used the divine celerity to flash in front of the masked wind god, looked at him coldly. "Although I don't know where you're from, since you're the vassal of that brave warrior, you should know your place. A battle between kings is not something a servant like you can interfere in." Yerek, who had turned into a stream of lightning, also appeared in front of Lancelot and smiled. "We've known each other for a long time. It's time to settle our grudges. Don't you think so?" Lancelot and the masked wind god, who were about to chase after the hero, suddenly stopped. They looked up and met Luo Hao's and Yerek's eyes. An unprecedented battle was about to begin. Chapter 1493. Whoosh! Amidst the sharp sound of breaking air, the 2 meteors chased each other and rushed into the sky. They made a turn above the clouds and heavily collided with each other. Boom! Amidst the astonishing muffled sound, a circular shockwave spread out like an explosion. It was like a substantial storm ring, shaking the surroundings, causing the atmosphere and the space to become chaotic and let out a mournful wail. As the shockwave spread out in a ring shape, Noah and the hero's figures were finally revealed. As if pushed back by the shockwave, they quickly retreated backward. They were at an altitude of more than 3,000 meters. Therefore, there was no one here. Noah and the hero were both individuals with extremely powerful strength. However, the 2 of them had a similarity. That was, neither of them could fly if they were to rely on their own strength. Noah had incarnations such as storm and thunder, which allowed him to gain the ability to fly while he was using them. For example, he could control the wind to fly. For example, he could directly transform into thunder. However, Noah could not always use one incarnation. In that case, the advantage of being able to switch between incarnations for various situations would be gone. One had to know that the reason why Welslana was able to become the god of victory was because of his ability to adapt to various situations. Noah naturally could not give up this advantage. Fortunately, Noah still wore a flying magic tool around his neck. At that moment, Noah whispered softly, "Fly." The wing-shaped necklace around Noah's neck suddenly bloomed with a faint light. In the next second, Noah's figure stopped in mid-air and floated up. Like Noah, the hero did not have the ability to fly. However, the hero also had the power to solve all kinds of trivial problems. "Spirits that float between heaven and earth, please give me strength," the hero, known as the last king, stretched out his right index and middle fingers and quickly drew a holy seal in the air. At this moment, bursts of light particles suddenly flashed out from the surrounding space. Like fireflies, they gathered in the direction of the hero and enveloped his entire body. Everything had a spirit. Those firefly-like light particles were all miscellaneous spirits in the world. They did not have the power to compare to the god of disobedience. They did not even have a personality or intelligence. They were just illusory spiritual energy. Now, the hero called upon the spirits between heaven and earth to let them float around him, supporting his body that could not fly. At this moment, a figure cut through the air and shot in front of the hero as fast as lightning. A hand clenched into a fist, mixed with crimson air scales, and heavily punched the hero's chest. The attack was so sudden that even the hero could not help but be slightly surprised. Then, he reacted. His entire body flashed with electric sparks, jumping on the surface of the hero's body. However, right at that moment, the crimson flames that surged out of Noah's body suddenly changed direction and turned into countless bolts of lightning. I am the conqueror who can defeat 1,000 with 100, 10,000 with 1,000, and 10,000 with 10,000. Now, for me who is on the side of justice, please shine brightly and bestow me with divine power. Amidst the sacred words, Noah's entire body burst out with astonishing electric light. Just like a warrior, violent electric sparks leaped up from the surface of his body. Under such circumstances, the fist that was aimed at the hero's chest also contained violent lightning, entangling with the leaping electric sparks on the hero's body. Beep, beep, beep. Amidst the fierce electric sparks, two types of blue lightning intertwined with each other, twisting together for a moment. The fist carrying the electric sparks did not stop at all. It directly passed through the layers of lightning and struck the hero's chest like a bolt of lightning. At this moment, Noah's fist was less than 5 centimeters away from the hero's chest. Even if the hero was the one who had annihilated the Demon King, it was impossible for him to defend himself at this moment. Because of that, the hero decided to completely ignore Noah's incoming punch. He suddenly raised the divine blade of salvation in his hand and ruthlessly chopped at Noah's neck. The hero was planning to exchange injury for injury. Noah could not help but feel his heart skip a beat. With the Leo's sovereign son in his body, Noah, who was invulnerable, should not be afraid of such a sharp blade attack. However, the hero's savior divine sword was no ordinary sharp blade. Not only was it the form of all the god relics that the heavenly gods had given to the hero, but it was also one with the hero. It was a divine sword that was like a clone of the hero. In other words, since the hero's body could release violent lightning, the savior divine sword would definitely be able to release lightning like electric sparks as well. In the end, even if he blocked the savior divine sword's attack, the lightning that bloomed on it would definitely cause damage to Noah. In addition to that, the divine sword was the most powerful god relic that could even cut a star. It was still unknown if the Leo constellation's sovereignty over the sun could surpass it. No matter what, Noah's intuition told him that he could not block this divine sword with his invulnerable body. Without any hesitation, Noah suddenly stopped his attack. His entire body turned into a bolt of lightning and appeared in front of the hero. Slash! The divine saber that cut through space instantly cut the lightning that had suddenly appeared into 2 halves, causing a tearing sound to ring out. The lightning that was cut in half immediately gathered together and shot out, creating a distance between them and the hero. Seeing this, the hero who had annihilated the Demon King chanted loudly. Savior divine sword, the heavenly realm weapon that the heavenly gods have given you. Show your true power. A mandala formation spun behind the hero's back. It expanded gradually and covered the hero's back. Inside, the god relics were covered in lightning bolts one after another. They turned into heavenly lightning that could save the world. They shot out like laser beams, covering the direction where the thunder god was retreating. The lightning that was shooting out stopped and turned into a human again in a flash. Buzz! Golden ripples that looked like water waves appeared and covered Noah's back as well. Subsequently, relics appeared one after another and shot out. They turned into beams of light and went straight for the god relic divine lightning that was attacking. Bang! 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 The treasures and god relics that were famous in various mythological systems collided like needles against an awl. They were like cannonballs that collided with each other. Sparks were set off amidst the muffled booms. Staring at the various relics that appeared from the golden ripples that looked like water waves that covered Noah's back, there was disbelief in the hero's eyes even though he had seen it before. Why? The hero could not help but ask. Why are you like me? Why do you have a weapon that only the gods of the heaven realm can have? Noah said calmly as he looked at the hero who had the Manchala formation hovering behind him. It's simple. It's because you have the heavenly gods behind you, but I have the world itself. The world itself? The hero mumbled. The world itself? Obviously, even the heroes who were favored by the gods of the heaven realm and had annihilated countless demon kings since ancient times could not understand what Noah meant by his words. Noah could not help but laugh as he said that. If you can't understand it, then there's no need to. No matter what, there has to be a winner between us. It's either you die or I die. If that's the case, what's the point even if you understand the reason behind it? The hero was momentarily stunned. After a moment of silence, he nodded in an open-minded manner. You're right. We don't need to understand each other in our battle. Instead, we need to fight each other. It's enough to know that. After that, Noah and hero exchanged gazes again, sparks flying from their gazes. The golden ripples that looked like water waves and the Manchala formation shone brightly. Chapter 1494. Just as Noah and the hero were engaged in the most intense battle in the world above the clouds, there were also two battlefields on the ground. One was the battlefield where Luohao and the masked wind god were. The other was the battlefield where Yerek and Lancelot were. After Noah and the hero flew into the sky, Luohao, Yerek, Lancelot, and the masked wind god each found their own opponents and began to fight. Whoosh! The wind howled above the ground as if it had turned into a tornado, encircling the entire battlefield. It was not a wind generated by nature, but a wind generated by the masked wind god's power. In the center of the huge tornado that surrounded the entire battlefield, Luohao and the masked wind god stood facing each other with a distance between them. Luohao looked at the wind god, who was covered in bandages and wearing a mask on his face, and said coldly, "Unknown wind god, tell me your name." Hearing that, the masked wind god's body surged with a huge amount of curse power, but he did not say a word and completely ignored Luohao's question. This caused Luohao's brows to furrow tightly as she cried out in a delicate voice. You should be a famous hero, or else you wouldn't follow the hero with the title of the last king, and not even have the courage to tell me your name? The masked wind god raised his face slightly and faced Luohao with his masked face, still not saying a word. If it were any other time, whoever dared to ignore Luohao like this would definitely be torn to pieces by the unparalleled Wulin Alliance master. However, in the battle, Luohao was a famous wuxia hero, so she immediately understood something. I see. Can't reveal your real name? In the world of Type Moon, the heroic spirits who descended in the form of servants would try their best to hide their real names in the Holy Grail War. This was because the heroic spirits were very famous heroes in all kinds of myths and legends, and each of them had their own stories. In these stories, the heroes' lives were described, and naturally, the abilities and weaknesses of the heroic spirits were included as well. Under such circumstances, if one revealed their real name without permission, others would find the weaknesses of the heroic spirits themselves from the myths and legends and restrain them. This situation was also applicable to this world. Some gods of disobedience would openly announce their names, just to be worthy of themselves. However, some disobedient gods would also hide their true names to prevent others from finding their weaknesses. Since the masked wind god had concealed his real name, appearance, and even his voice, and was unwilling to speak, he must be a famous god. Once his real name was exposed, it was very likely that his weakness would be exposed. No, it's not just a weakness. Luo Hao shook his head and looked directly at the masked wind god. Since you're the vassal of the hero, doesn't that mean that the hero's true appearance will also be exposed once your true name is exposed? These words had just sounded when the masked wind god suddenly lifted his head. The masked wind god stomped his feet on the ground and rushed towards Luo Hao. He clenched his hands into fists and punched towards Luo Hao without any fancy moves. Humph. In the face of the sudden attack from the masked wind god, Luo Hao snorted coldly. He neither advanced nor retreated. Similarly, he took a step forward. His right palm shot out at lightning speed, and his palms suddenly clapped. Bang! In the midst of a muffled sound that made people's hearts constrict, Luo Hao's seemingly weak palm actually slapped the masked wind god's fist away. Then, Luo Hao raised his other hand and struck a hard palm in the direction of the masked wind god. In this palm, Luo Hao used the power of the mighty Vajra divine skill and the unique skill of the 12 flying phoenix divine palms, combining the pinnacle of strength and skill, and struck out heavily. The palm, which was strong enough to split mountains and split rocks, caused the air to be compressed and burst, making a heavy sonic boom sound. It was extremely terrifying. The masked wind god did not seem to want to take such a palm head-on. His body suddenly moved, and he dodged Luo Hao's palm strike. Dong! The palm strike that landed in the air shook the atmosphere, causing the atmosphere to roar. The masked wind god, on the other hand, clenched his fists and put on an offensive posture. Facing Luo Hao's face, he threw out heavy fist shadows, smashing them like a storm. The fist shadows that filled the sky seemed to be chaotic, but in fact, they were faintly bombarding the weak points of Luo Hao's body. The method was quite clever. However, as the king of Wuxia who was the best in the world in martial arts, Luo Hao easily saw through the mystery and made this female hero who was not inferior to men make a loud declaration. Are you also a person who has reached the pinnacle of martial arts? As he spoke, Luo Hao raised both of his palms and quickly took up the stance of the 12 flying phoenix divine palms. He brandished both of his palms, and the wind from his palms, which carried extreme strength, seemed to form an invisible cyclone, scattering all the gravel on the ground. Bang! In the next moment, the fierce palm wind and the heavy fist shadow suddenly collided, causing the ripples of strength to violently fluctuate. Immediately, Luo Hao and the masked wind god raised their palms and fists at the same time, and with a dazzling speed, they quickly blasted out. Bang! 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 Suddenly, the fierce palm strike and the heavy fist collided again and again, stirring up a low muffled sound that rang out incessantly. In the center of the tornado, the two figures intertwined with each other. Every palm strike, every punch, was almost a head-on collision, causing the vigorous chi to shake continuously. Luo Hao's 12 flying phoenix divine palms was indeed the pinnacle of martial arts. Although the palm strike seemed simple and there was nothing mysterious about it, the entire space was included in the attack range, making it impossible for people to escape. The masked wind god's entire body seemed to be in contact with Luo Hao. This was because the moment he approached Luo Hao, the masked wind god seemed to have turned into a meat grinder. Fists, elbows, fingers, legs, and even any part of the body at this moment erupted with incomparably powerful strength. Under such circumstances, the confrontation between Luo Hao and the masked wind god became extremely fierce. The fists and palms of both sides were like a torrential rain that vented on the enemy's body, causing the Han Chinese clothes on Luo Hao's body and the bandages on the masked wind god's body to be shaken until there were holes in them. Boom! At a certain moment, following a fierce collision, Luo Hao and the masked wind god both took a few steps back amidst the thump-thump-thump sounds. The first person to stabilize his body was the masked wind god. He stomped his foot on the ground and forcibly stabilized his body. The masked wind god suddenly raised a fist, which surged with a strong fluctuation of curse power. At this moment, even Luo Hao could clearly feel it. The masked wind god seemed to have used all the curse power in his body, condensing a force stronger than before. Immediately, the masked wind god rushed out quickly. That speed made the masked wind god's figure directly turn into a light shadow, like a mirage, rushing violently toward Luo Hao. No. That was not just fast speed. That was the power that Noah and Yerek both had seraphic speed. At this moment, the masked wind god suddenly released the power of seraphic speed and launched an attack. If it was an ordinary person, even a god slayer, faced with a sudden attack of seraphic speed, they might not be able to react in time. Unfortunately, Luo Hao did not. This was because this unparalleled wuxia king had already mastered the mind's eye consummate skill that could even see through seraphic speed. The general will die soon, the soldiers will destroy his barracks, blood will flow in the wilderness, bones will be left in the border court, leaving only traces of the horse, leaving only the name on paper. In the light ballad, Luo Hao's words turned into a violent demonic wind, which shook from his body. Boom! A powerful storm broke out in the field, directly hitting the masked wind god's body, sending him flying out violently. Like a kite with a broken string, he fell heavily to the ground. Not only did the attack send the masked wind god flying, it also tore apart the bandages on his body. As a result, the masked wind god's body was exposed to Luo Hao's eyes. Looking at the masked wind god's body that was hidden under the bandages, Luo Hao's eyes suddenly focused. Chapter 1495. Luo Hao silently stared at the body of the masked god of wind, who had fallen to the ground. At this time, the bandages wrapped around his body broke apart inch by inch, completely exposing the body hidden inside to Luo Hao's eyes. However, what was exposed was not the skin that a human should have, but a white fur. It did not look messy at all. Instead, it was quite soft, but very dense white fur. Isn't it a human body? In Luo Hao's whisper, the masked god of wind jumped up very flexibly and stood up again. Looking at the broken bandages and exposed fur on his body, the masked god of wind was silent for a long time. After a while, he finally spoke for the first time since he appeared. It seems that there is no need to hide. With such a sentence, the masked god of wind directly tore the broken bandages on his body and took off his mask. The face under the mask, of course, was not a human face. It was an ape's face with a pointy mouth and monkey cheeks. Excellency Ape, with white body hair and a height of about 180 centimeters, appeared in Luo Hao's eyes. He was somewhat similar to the great sage, heaven's equal, and was wrapped in a red waistband. However, unlike the naughty and competitive expression of the great sage, Excellency Ape's expression was very mature, and even faintly had a feeling of being very intellectual and very wise. Excellency Ape with white body hair. Luo Hao's eyes flickered, and he seemed to finally understand something. In all kinds of myths, there were many Excellency Ape with white body hair. However, the medium used by the brave man who followed Excellency Ape to receive the weapons given by the gods of heaven was Manchala. As mentioned before, Manchala was a Japanese magic array with thousands of gods and Buddhas painted in geometric figures. Tracing back to its origin, the origin of the Manchala square could be traced back to India, which was a doctrine advocated by the Hindu religion. In other words, the brave man who used the Manchala square to receive the weapons given by the gods of heaven was most likely a god in Indian mythology. In Indian mythology, when it came to Excellency Ape, who had white body hair and could manipulate the wind, there was only one god that came to mind. Although Luo Hao was extremely lacking in self-awareness, he was not a fool. Having lived for over 200 years, although Luo Hao couldn't be said to know all sorts of mythological systems like the back of his hand, he could still be said to be very knowledgeable. Thinking that the Excellency Ape in front of him was very likely to be the famous divine monkey in Indian mythology, and the hero he followed was the god who annihilated the demon king, Luo Hao was surprised. I see. Is that the hero's true identity? Have you guessed the real name of my master? The white Excellency Ape slowly clenched his fist and stared at Luo Hao. There's no other way. I can't let you leave this place. Excellency Ape's body burst into a violent whirlwind. Although it is my master's duty to annihilate the demon king, as a subordinate, it shouldn't be too much for me to carry it out on your behalf, right? Do you want to keep me here? Luo Hao smiled, but there was no trace of a smile in her eyes. You are indeed a famous hero, but if you want to keep Luo Zuelian, there should be a limit to your arrogance. Well, the master you follow will be defeated by my husband. In that case, as my husband's concubine, I can eliminate these useless soldiers and crab generals, so as not to ruin my husband's reputation. After that, Luo Hao's feather-like robe began to shake, and the magic storm also swelled from her body and swept away in an instant. In the face of me, the god of wind, you actually used the wind to fight back? Excellency Ape said sarcastically. What a fool. How dare a mere beast question Luo Zuelian's ability? Luo Hao's body surged with amazing curse power. Very well, let me engrave the power of the unparalleled king of Wuxia deeply into your soul, and repent when you go to hell. The extremely violent whirlwind surged wildly from Luo Hao and Excellency Ape, cutting the ground, disturbing the atmosphere, and bringing out a harsh whistling sound that resounded throughout the world. Then, the two raging storms, which were enough to tear the earth apart, hit each other like violent tsunamis. The outcome would be decided in a few seconds. When Luo Hao and the White Excellency Ape were fighting fiercely, on the other side, Yerek was in a rather embarrassing situation. Boom! Accompanied by a roar, the entire ground burst open, setting off thick sand and dust and stirring up a powerful impact force. It carried pieces of gravel and shook in all directions. Yerek, whose whole body was covered with electric sparks, was like being slapped by a huge wave. He rolled out of the thick sandstorm in a very embarrassing way. After rolling on the ground several times, he stabilized his body. Chi! At this time, in the thick sand in front of him, a black shadow suddenly rushed out. With a sharp sound, it appeared in front of Yerek in an instant. It was none other than the knight on the white horse, Lancelot. Lancelot, who was riding on his beloved horse, raised the scale-shaped spear in his hand. With a shake of his arm, the spear violently stabbed at Yerek. Looking at the momentum, if Yerek was stabbed, even if he was lucky, he would be reduced to the same situation as yesterday, with a big bloody hole in his body. Looking at the rapidly enlarging spear tip, Yerek released the power of lightning and fire, and let the electric spark soar on his body. His body turned into a flash of lightning and trembled strangely. Puff! With a tearing sound, the spear fiercely pierced Yerek's chest. However, Lancelot's body suddenly stagnated. This was because not only did the spear not pierce through Yerek's body, but blood also didn't spurt out as expected. Instead, the spear directly pierced through Yerek's back as if it had pierced through air. Only then did Lancelot realize that something was wrong. Afterimage? As soon as his voice fell, the figure of Yerek, whose chest was pierced, distorted and disappeared. After releasing the power of lightning and speed, Yerek could even create afterimages. In this regard, Lancelot only exclaimed, then suddenly raised the spear in his hand and swung it. The end of the spear was like a windmill, fiercely smashing into the space beside Lancelot. Bang! The spear body, which contained a powerful force, heavily smashed with a muffled sound. A figure appeared beside Lancelot without any warning, and was directly sent flying by the spear that smashed towards him. Ugh! Yerek could not help but let out a muffled groan. With electric sparks all over his body, he finally stabilized his body and landed on the ground with difficulty. As soon as he landed on the ground, Yerek immediately knelt on one knee, covered his chest, coughed a few times, and muttered somewhat gloomily. Sure enough, for me who is good at using the power of lightning and speed, the knight who can see through the lightning and speed is my biggest nemesis. Although this was what he said, Yerek still stood up with difficulty. Lancelot, who was riding on the white horse, turned around and looked condescendingly at Yerek, who was struggling to stand up, and said in a seemingly happy tone. Your speed is indeed quite outstanding, and you use it well. Unfortunately, if it's just speed, it won't be able to defeat me. I think so too, Yerek said very calmly, as if he could not see his own embarrassing state. Then, I'll play a little trick. After saying this, Yarek's body burst out with extremely bright electric sparks, and his body trembled violently. Immediately, under Lancelot's surprised gaze, two figures that looked exactly the same as Yarek split from his body. "This is..." Lancelot said with some surprise. Under such circumstances, Yarek, who was split into three, said in unison. "My power is not only to enter the world of lightning and speed. For example, I can turn myself into lightning, eliminate my aura, conceal my movements, and so on. I can even create doppelgangers, just like this." As soon as he finished speaking, the three identical Yareks all turned into lightning, split into three directions, and suddenly shot toward Lancelot's direction. Looking at the three lightning bolts shooting toward him, Lancelot frowned. Chapter 1496. Shio. The sharp sound of something tearing through the air reverberated throughout the entire space. Under Lancelot's gaze, three bolts of lightning shot towards him at lightning speed. In just an instant, the three bolts of lightning abruptly arrived, filling Lancelot's entire field of vision with dazzling electric light. Under that kind of lightning speed, there was no point in competing in terms of speed. Therefore, Lancelot didn't even move his body, only allowing the pair of eyes under the helmet to stare unwaveringly at the three bolts of lightning that shot towards him. At some point, his pupils slightly contracted. Under the full effect of the mind's eye skill, Lancelot clearly saw it. Among the three bolts of lightning that shot towards him, one of them suddenly trembled slightly, the dazzling electric light on it also slightly weakened. The moment it weakened, the bolt of lightning transformed into a human, imprinting Yarek's grave and stern face into Lancelot's eyes. However, that didn't make Lancelot certain that it was Yarek's true body. Even so, Lancelot's heart didn't have the slightest bit of hesitation. Immediately, Lancelot raised the long spear in his hand. On the long spear, a burst of electric light suddenly flickered. Lancelot was also a user of lightning. As an adventurer and an explorer, Yarek had an extremely thorough understanding of the so-called steel. Therefore, Yarek knew that controlling lightning was the symbol of the most original steel. Therefore, the hero, who was known as the strongest steel, could also control lightning, and could even transform the god relics bestowed by the gods of the heavens into heavenly lightning that could save the world, carrying out an indiscriminate bombardment in all directions. Although Lancelot wasn't at the level of a hero, this knight was also the most original steel god. Naturally, Lancelot could also control lightning to a certain extent, and even manipulate the weather, turning himself into a mist, thus obtaining an immortal body. Thus, holding the long spear that flickered with electric light, Lancelot heavily stabbed the long spear in his hand amidst the sound of a strong wind, ruthlessly piercing Yarek, who had transformed from lightning into a human. Bang! A low explosive sound abruptly rang out at this moment. The long spear that flickered with electric light suddenly pierced Yarek, who had transformed from lightning into a human, causing his figure to abruptly shatter into pieces. Wang! In that instant, the other two bolts of lightning shuddered and also transformed into human figures. Their bodies were covered in electric sparks as they directly charged toward Lancelot's body. Dong! The thunderous explosion turned into a substantial shockwave that spread across the entire ground. Beep, beep, beep. Dazzling lightning exploded from the center of the impact, instantly turning the surrounding area within a few hundred meters into a pool of lightning, causing the ground to tremble. Immediately, arcs of lightning shot out from the pool of lightning like pythons, flashing across the ground at an extremely fast speed. Then, the two bolts of lightning seemed to be repelled by the rampaging lightning pool at the same time. They shot out from opposite ends of the lightning pool and heavily smashed into the ground not far away. Bang! The ground suddenly exploded, raising a cloud of sand and dust. After an unknown amount of time, the dust and lightning gradually subsided. In the two pits, Lancelot, who was riding on a white horse, and Yarek, whose body was flashing with electric arcs, appeared at the same time. The armor on one's body seemed to have become charred. The clothes on the other's body were tattered and covered in dust. Both of them were also in a sorry state. However, if one observed carefully, they would definitely be able to discover it. Although Lancelot's appearance was somewhat disheveled, his aura was not in any disorder. On the other hand, not only did the electric arcs flashing on Yarek's body weaken a lot, but he was also constantly gasping for breath. There was no need to explain who had the upper hand. As expected of the god-slaying demon king who can find a way to win under any circumstances. You're really amazing to be able to make dust stick to my armor even when I'm so restrained. Lancelot did not hide his admiration, but at the same time, there was a faint sense of regret in his tone. If possible, I really hope to continue fighting with you. However, it is not my style to show mercy in order to continue fighting. I will use my full strength and speed to charge forward. Black Prince, in your state, can you block my full blow? Hearing this, although Yarek was still gasping for breath, he laughed disdainfully. Block? That's not right. It should be my turn next. Lancelot was suddenly stunned. You've been dealing with me for a long time. Have you forgotten? Yarek sneered. Have you forgotten my goddess of vengeance? Lancelot's breath stopped. The goddess of vengeance. That was the power that Yarek had usurped from the three famous goddesses in Greek mythology, Alecto, Tisiphone, and Megala. In Greek mythology, Alecto, Tisiphone, and Megala were the goddesses of punishment. They were collectively known as the three goddesses of vengeance. According to legend, these three goddesses were three tall women with snake hair on their heads, bloody tears in their eyes, wings on their shoulders, torches in their hands, and snake whips in their hands. They were very terrifying. The three goddesses would chase humans who had committed the crime of murder on Earth, driving them mad. They were also responsible for carrying out punishment on the dead with sins in the underworld. They were the gods that the Greeks were most afraid of. It was the same as Luo Hao usurping the power of generals Heng Ha and Heng Ha. The power of the goddess of vengeance that Yarek had usurped came from the three goddesses who were a trinity. Only when the three of them were together could it be considered a complete divinity. With this power, Yarek would also have the right to take revenge on his enemies. He could spend a few minutes or even dozens of minutes to meditate and create the domain of vengeance. And when Yarek was in the domain of vengeance, all the attacks he received during this period would all be converted into the power of the three goddesses of vengeance and returned to the attacker without any change. Lancelot was also aware of the existence of this power. So, Lancelot said without any confusion. But I remember that this power requires the three goddesses to be summoned in advance, and after a certain period of meditation and ritual, it can only be used. It can't be used immediately in battle. Even if you use it now, as long as I withdraw from the domain of vengeance, this power will be useless. Withdraw from the domain of vengeance? Yarek suddenly laughed, and his laughter was unusually sarcastic. Haven't you realized that you've already stepped into my territory of vengeance and launched quite a few attacks? What? Lancelot was stunned at first, but then he finally understood and his expression changed abruptly. It can't be, you guessed right. Yarek suddenly raised his head. Long before you came here, I had already used the power of the goddess of vengeance to summon the three goddesses of vengeance and hid them underground. During this period of time, you will have a good taste of the attacks you launched against me. Yarek loudly chanted the spirit of words. Listen well, daughters of the eternal night, daughters of the earth and shadow. Under Yarek's spirit of words, the ground around him suddenly burst open, and three black shadows sprang out. They were three demonesses whose hair was all made up of snakes, and they had black wings like crows on their backs. Curb evil with evil, pay crime with crime, sacrifice blood with blood, pay tooth for tooth. This is the starting point of vengeance. The blood of the mother who was killed by the enemy, in the most tragic way to tell you that you can no longer repay your kindness. The three goddesses of vengeance surrounding Yarek had a bloody glint in their eyes as they stared at Lancelot. Demonis Morgella, Avenger Tisiphone, Alecto the Endless, quickly reflect the curse back and complete your revenge. Now is the time for vengeance. At this moment, a powerful curse power burst out from Yarek and the three goddesses. Lancelot didn't even have time to react before the space around him suddenly distorted. Immediately, all of Lancelot's previous attacks against Yerek were turned into invisible power by the three goddesses of vengeance, and violently surged in Lancelot's direction. Victory and defeat were also decided in a few seconds. Chapter 1497. Whoosh. 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 A series of piercing sounds resounded in the sky. It was the sound of all sorts of weapons shooting out like arrows. The relics that turned into light beams and the god relics that turned into lightning bolts shot out of the golden ripples and the gigantic Manchala formation respectively. They tore through the air and tore through space like a storm. They collided hard mid-air. Bang! 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 Each collision was a collision between myths and legends. Every time they clashed, it was a clash between legends. All sorts of legendary weapons that were famous in myths and legends had turned into arrows at the moment. They were shot at their opponents in the most violent and wasteful way as their owners squandered them. Whang! Every time a relic shot out from the golden ripples, turning into a beam of light and shooting towards the hero, the golden ripples would suddenly tremble, and new relic would be ejected one after another. Clang! Each time the god relics shot out of the gigantic Manchala formation and turned into lightning bolts that charged at Noah, the grids in the gigantic Manchala formation would glow and new god relics would appear one after another. Under such circumstances, Noah, who had golden ripples like water behind him, and the hero, who had a gigantic Manchala formation hovering behind him, stood in the air. They were not stingy at all as they unleashed their precious relics and god relics at each other. Undoubtedly, this was something that one would never see on a normal day. The reason being that the relics and god relics were charging at each other as if they were free. They collided with each other frequently, creating muffled explosions and scorching fire waves. The relics and god relics were mythical. Even the gods and heroes in all sorts of myths and legends would only own one of each relic and god relic under normal circumstances. However, it was such a weapon that allowed the gods and heroes to create their own legends. Nowadays, even the gods and heroes would only possess one mythical weapon under normal circumstances. They were all like worthless arrows that were thrown out by their owners one by one. What was squandering money like dirt? That was squandering money like dirt. However, both Noah and the hero had the right to squander money like that. Therefore, the battle fell into a stalemate. The hero who was holding the Savior Divine sword looked at Noah who was throwing relics at him. His eyes flickered a few times. Subsequently, he let go of the Savior Divine sword in his hand and allowed it to hover next to him. The hero extended his arm and took out a bow and arrow from one of the grids in the Manchala formation behind him. He held it in front of him and aimed it at Noah. He pulled the bowstring slowly. Bang! The arrow knocked on the bowstring immediately seemed to be on fire, exploding with an astonishing flame. Surya's arrow. Surya was the sun god in Hindu mythology. The undying hero Karna was his son. He was also the one who gave Karna the sun armor. Now, the hero took out the arrow given to him by Surya, the sun god in Hindu mythology, and shot the sun god's arrow. The flaming arrow suddenly swelled up in the wind, emitting a dazzling light. It was as if it had turned into a sun, rubbing against the air as it shot toward Noah. Looking at the bright and dazzling sun, Noah's face was as calm as an ancient well. He extended his arm and reached into a golden ripple behind him. In the next moment, a trident that seemed to be made of gold emerged from the golden ripple. Noah held it tightly in his hand and pulled it out. Swoosh! A surge of water suddenly appeared on the trident that seemed to be made of gold. Like two water dragons, they surrounded the body of the trident and gradually swelled. Poseidon's trident. In Greek mythology, the god of the sea was Poseidon. According to legend, when he was angry, huge waves would rise in the ocean and heavy rain would fall from the sky. Every inch of land on the continent would sink into the water and all life would be destroyed. The god of the sea's weapon was the trident. Using it, one could easily set off monstrous waves, storms, and tsunamis, sink the continent, and collapse the heavens and earth. Noah waved the trident in his hand toward the sun that was shooting toward him. The water around the trident suddenly exploded and turned into a monstrous wave. It surged out and covered the sky toward the sun that was shooting toward him. Amidst a bone-chilling sound, the sun was drowned by the monstrous waves. Half of the seawater was evaporated, and billowing steam filled the air, instantly covering the entire horizon. However, the remaining half of the seawater still surged out and mercilessly covered the direction of the hero. Looking at the monstrous wave, the hero's eyes narrowed. He released the bow in his hand and took out a new weapon from the mandala formation. It was a weapon called Vajra. Beep! 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 A burst of lightning flashed from the weapon. Vajra. The term Vajra was originally used to describe the lightning used by Sakra. Indra was the heavenly emperor in Hindu mythology, also known as Indra. He was the king of gods in Hindu mythology and also the god of war. Later on, he even joined Buddhism and became the guardian god of Buddhism along with Brahma, one of the three supreme gods in Hindu mythology. Vajra was Sakra's weapon. The black rabbit that Noah knew was Sakra's family in the world of boxes. The god's persona weapon, Vajra replica, that he was using was a god's persona weapon that Sakra had given him. However, the hero was not using a god's persona weapon at the moment. Instead, he was using a real god's persona weapon that Indra had given him. The hero who was holding the Vajra replica lifted it above his head directly. The lightning flashing on it immediately surged. Tens of thousands of lightning bolts surged toward the monstrous wave that was surging toward him. Suddenly, the monstrous wave that was covered by tens of thousands of lightning bolts trembled. It was diminishing at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. Soon, the monstrous wave was dissolved by the tens of thousands of lightning bolts before it could even reach the hero. It evaporated into the air and disappeared completely. The tens of thousands of lightning bolts continued to surge, like a gradually expanding pool of lightning. Like a tide, they surged in Noah's direction. Seeing that, Noah narrowed his eyes and extended his hand toward the golden ripples that looked like water waves next to him again. This time, a heavy hammer popped out of the golden ripples that looked like water waves. Noah held it tightly in his hand. Lightning bolts surged on it as well. Mjolnir. It was the weapon that was known as the most powerful in Norse mythology. Everyone knew that Odin was the main god of Norse mythology. He was also the king who ruled over the Norse gods. However, in Norse mythology, the most powerful god was not Odin, who was the main god, but Thor, who was known as the thunder god. The weapon that made Thor the invincible Mjolnir was the Mjolnir. In order to fight the king of gods in Hindu mythology, Indra the heavenly emperor's lightning, Noah used the most powerful weapon in Norse mythology, the thunder god's weapon. There was no hesitation at all. Noah raised the heavy hammer in his hand and swung it at the tens of thousands of lightning bolts that were attacking him. Pung! It was as if even space itself was smashed by the heavy hammer. Countless lightning bolts exploded from the heavy hammer. In the next second, tens of thousands of lightning bolts collided with the lightning pool formed by tens of thousands of lightning bolts. Rumble. Amidst the earth-shattering roar, the collision of lightning bolts burst into flames, causing a terrifying wave of fire to suddenly explode and cover the entire sky. Chapter 1498. Boom! A deafening explosion that was loud enough to shatter one's eardrums echoed through the sky. The sound of the explosion resounded across the sky, causing an extremely terrifying firestorm to sweep out from the clouds in an instant. In the blink of an eye, it had expanded to a radius of several hundred meters. The terrifying firestorm swept across the sky. The scorching temperature caused the air above the clouds to be extremely dry. The majestic wave of fire spread across the sky like a curtain of fire, occupying a large part of the sky. It distorted and blurred the space around it. The waves of fire were still churning like the waves of the sea, sweeping in all directions. One could faintly see lightning bolts shooting out from the center of the wave of fire, bringing about a series of thunderous roars. That scene was simply like a storm of thunder and fire mixed together, wreaking havoc above the clouds. The clouds below were dyed green and red, and the colors were constantly changing. It was believed that the so-called heaven and earth phenomenon must be referring to such a situation. Nobody knew how long the wave of fire and lightning wreaked havoc before the shocking commotion above the clouds gradually subsided. In the sky far away, the two silhouettes were still facing each other without moving. One of them had golden ripples behind him while the other had a magic square floating behind him. Their gazes met in midair. However, no matter if it was the golden ripple or the magic formation, there were no traces of the famous relics and god relics in all sorts of myths and legends on it. Of course, it was not because the demon king and the hero had used up all their treasures as they fought in the most extravagant way. The hero aside, Noah's Gate of Babylon had an automatic retrieval function. No matter how many relics Noah threw out, the valuable relics would be retrieved one by one. None of them would be left out. Therefore, Noah did not take out any relics because he felt that there was no need to continue. It was clear that the hero had the same thought. If it's just a competition of our weapons, there's no way we'll be able to determine the victor, Hero said with great admiration. For thousands of years, I've killed many demon kings, but I've never met an opponent like you. If it weren't for the weapons given to me by the gods in the heavens, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to defeat you. Why was Gilgamesh known as the strongest existence among the heroic spirits? The reason was simple. It was because the hero king had all the prototypes of relics since ancient times. And every heroic spirit had their own weaknesses in their own myths and legends. With all the noble phantasms, Gilgamesh could easily find the noble phantasms that targeted the weaknesses of his enemies and mercilessly kill them. Now, Noah and the hero were in the same situation. No matter what kind of relics Noah used, the hero would be able to find a god relic that targeted it from his treasure vault. No matter what kind of god relic the hero took out, Noah would be able to find a relic that could defeat it from his treasure vault. Both of them were not competing with strength, but wealth. In the end, no one would know who had the better collection unless they continued to compete. However, regardless of whether it was Noah or the hero, they did not have the patience to continue competing with the amount of items they had in their treasure vaults. Therefore, both of them stopped fighting at the same time. The golden ripples and the gigantic Manchala formation behind them disappeared as if they had never existed in the first place. Noah then spoke coldly. If this continues, I'm afraid there'll be no end to it. I don't have that much time to play with you. Me too. I must complete my mission as soon as possible and fall into a deep slumber again, the hero agreed and suggested. In my opinion, from now on, let's not use weapons to attack each other. Let's just use force to determine the victor. Noah raised his brow when he heard that. He looked at the hero with a faint smile. That's easy for you to say. Even if you don't use the weapons given to you by the gods in the heavens, you still have the powerful divine sword. As for me, are you going to let me fight the divine sword that saved the world with my bare hands? There's nothing I can do about it. This saber is like a part of me, the warrior said, shaking his head. Although I still have the support of the ancient treaty, if I lose the divine sword, my strength will be greatly reduced. When that happens, I definitely won't be able to defeat you. That's why I have no choice but to use the divine sword. This really surprises me. Noah looked at the hero with some surprise. Undoubtedly, you have the support of the ancient treaty. You have the strength of 7 god-slayers. Do you really think that you won't be able to defeat a single god-slayer without the divine sword? I also find it unbelievable, but that's what I feel. The hero looked at Noah with an extremely serious expression. I can feel that you're different from the other god-slayers. Your strength is beyond my imagination. Without the divine sword, I definitely won't be able to defeat you. Noah couldn't help but look at him in a new light when he heard the resolute and decisive words of the warrior. Your senses are very sharp, Noah said indifferently. That's right. The way I see it, if you don't have the divine sword, even if you have the support of the ancient treaty, you definitely won't be a threat. That's why I won't give up on the divine sword. The hero nodded calmly. Since you also have 1,000 weapons, you should be able to find a weapon that can rival my divine sword in your collection, right? The hero's words made Noah's mouth fall open slightly. Just as Noah was about to say something, a voice suddenly rang out in his mind. Noah's face froze. Then, his eyes lit up and he suddenly smiled. You're right. My Aster won't lose to your divine sword that saved the world. As soon as he finished speaking, a crisscrossing sword mark on the back of Noah's hand emitted a blinding light. The dazzling light that blossomed from the elven engraving surged like a tide. Within it, a petite girl with long silver hair that reached her waist and a mysterious aura appeared. That's... The hero was a little surprised. Aster. Noah looked at the elven girl that appeared in the light. His tone became more or less excited. You're finally awake? Noah's voice made the elven girl that appeared in the light slowly open her eyes and stare at Noah. In those eyes, there was a sense of mystery that could be easily seen by others. Also, there was a strong sense of attachment that could only be seen by Noah. Master, with a soft call, Aster floated out of the light and followed the pull of gravity towards Noah. Noah opened his arms towards the elven girl that descended from the sky. With a gentle movement, he embraced Aster, who was leaping into his arms, and chanted. Cold Steel Queen, holy sword that slays demons and demons, turn into a sword of steel and bestow me with divine power. It was an incantation that was written in a completely different language. Even the hero didn't know that in this world, only Noah knew the elven language. In the midst of the incantation, the elven girl that leaped into Noah's arms slowly closed her eyes. Her whole body disintegrated into light particles and gathered in Noah's palm. Then, the silver holy sword gradually took shape and was tightly held in Noah's hand. Clang! A dazzling light blossomed from the silver holy sword. It was comparable to the light of the sun, a brilliant white light that illuminated the entire cloud. The hero widened his eyes slightly and tightened his grip on the divine blade of salvation. Clang! The divine blade of salvation suddenly bloomed with a dazzling light, as if it was trying to fight for the space occupied by the brilliant white light. The platinum light instantly surged in all directions like waves. Holding the silver holy sword tightly, Noah closed his eyes. Aster, with your power, can you win against that divine blade? No problem. Aster's voice that didn't have any confusion or emotion sounded in Noah's mind. With Master's current power, as long as you can perfectly control my power, you can defeat that divine blade. That's a reliable declaration. Noah's lips slowly curled up. Then, Aster, let's go. I am Master's sword. Aster said without hesitation. As you wish. Chapter 1499. In the box, in order to help Letitia escape from the Demon King game, Noah used the Dragon Emperor transformation ability to multiply Aster's power, causing Aster to fall into a deep sleep. However, it wasn't because Aster couldn't bear the enormous power that caused him to fall into a deep sleep. Instead, it was because the power multiplied stimulated Aster's own power, causing Aster to enter an awakened state. As the strongest sword spirit in the elemental world, Aster was once feared by the 5 elven kings and the Dark Elven King. In other words, this sword spirit's power could even threaten the elven kings who controlled the world's elements. Naturally, not just anyone could wield such great power. Sometimes, if the power of a contracted spirit was too great, to the point that the elven master couldn't control it, then after the contract was formed, the contracted spirit's power would be limited to a certain extent. This was just like the subordination contract in the box. In the box, if the power of the enslaved party was too great, then the enslaved party's power would decrease, to the extent that the enslaved party would be unable to control the enslaved party. The situation between Luos and the demon star spirit Argel was a good example of this. This situation also applied between an elven master and a contracted spirit. If the contracted spirit's power was far beyond what the elven master could control, then the contracted spirit's power would decrease, and it wouldn't be strange if he couldn't control it. When he formed the contract with Aster, Noah was only a newly minted elven master. Although he had great power, as an elven master, he was only a rookie. Naturally, he couldn't draw out much power from the strongest sword spirit during the contract. In view of this, after concluding the contract, Noah and Aster would often hone each other's tacit understanding in private and improve the abilities of the elves, hoping that one day they would be able to draw out Aster's power that even the elven king feared. Now, this moment had finally arrived. The moment he held the demon slayer, Noah felt the difference from before. As Noah imbued the demon slayer in his hand with a huge amount of divine might, an unprecedented amount of divine might was also fed back to him. Under such circumstances, Noah could clearly feel the power of the demon slayer in his hand. Sharpness, hardness, accuracy, and even explosiveness had all undergone a qualitative improvement. What's more, even the demon slayer's ability to break curses had reached a terrifying level. Holding the demon slayer tightly, Noah took a deep breath and instantly converted half of the energy in his body into divine might and the other half into divine power. All evildoers, be afraid of my power. Now, I shall obtain the majesty of 10 mountains, the strength of 100 rivers, and the strength of 1,000 giant dragons. The majestic me shall raise the ferocious power to slay dragons. Deep in Noah's heart, the stone plate floating in the cosmic sea turned and pointed at the incarnation of the Dragon Emperor. A crimson wave of air rose from Noah's body and turned into the phantom of a crimson dragon. Boost 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 boost. Above the phantom of the crimson dragon, the jade gems lit up one after another and released voices, causing a surge of power to flow through Noah's body and release an incomparably powerful aura. Sensing that Noah's aura was becoming more and more powerful, the hero's eyes became serious. Immediately, the hero raised the divine blade of salvation in his hand and pointed it high into the sky. Hum! Accompanied by a trembling sound, a blinding light bloomed from the divine blade of salvation. It soared into the sky and gradually condensed. Not long after, the blinding light from the divine blade of salvation turned into a small sun, illuminating the entire sky. Noah had seen that move once before. It was the same move that the hero had used to sink the entire invisible island when he had just awakened. Legend had it that the divine blade of salvation had the power to cut even stars. That legend was referring to this move. The hero's divine blade of salvation that had annihilated the demon king not only combined the forms of the weapons that the gods of the heavens had given it, but it was also one with the hero. It was like a divine relic that was part of the hero's body. Therefore, apart from being able to release the Manchala formation, this divine blade also had two abilities that were closely related to the hero. The other was the same as the original, steel, the ability to release lightning. This ability was the so-called lightning of salvation. The other was the same as the steel god. It could extract a large amount of energy from the earth and turn it into an attack that could cut stars. This ability was called the light of salvation. Now, the hero was using the second ability. Divine blade that is connected to my life, show the light of salvation and bring peace to the world. The hero chanted the sacred words and stepped into the void. He raised the divine blade in his hand and pointed it at the small sun above him. Like a god holding up the sun, he shook his arm and suddenly swung it down. In an instant, the sun that was shining brightly was like a huge meteor of light that fell from the sky. It rubbed against the air, and even the edges of its outline were flashing with red flames. It fell furiously in Noah's direction. Bang, 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 bang. Wherever the dazzling sun passed, the air would explode. Even the clouds below were shattered in an instant. It was as if the real sun had fallen. With unparalleled power, it suppressed Noah's direction. Raising his head, Noah looked at the scene that resembled the falling sun. His robes fluttered in the strong wind, but a fierce light flashed in his eyes. Clang! Gorgeous white light spread out from the holy sword in Noah's hand like a tide. Holding the holy sword that was also blooming with blinding light, but the light was not platinum. It was pure white. Noah fiercely stepped into the void. With a dong sound, his whole body rushed up and rushed toward the falling platinum sun. The brilliant white light that bloomed from the holy sword covered Noah's whole body with a layer of light. From afar, it looked like a comet that shot into the sky and violently shot toward the falling platinum sun. The scene was extremely shocking. In this way, the comet that shot into the sky directly hit the platinum sun. It was at this moment that a clear voice reverberated in the air. Absolute sword skill. Form breaker ardent flower spiral sword dance 36 consecutive strikes. As soon as the voice fell, it heavily hit the front of the comet that was above the platinum sun, and a burst of sword light flashed. Clang, 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 clang. Amidst the crisp sword sound, streaks of sword light flashed across the surface of the platinum sun like a storm. They swept past the platinum sun at a speed faster than the speed of sound. The slash that turned into a sword light cut the platinum sun into countless petals, causing the falling platinum sun to suddenly stop in midair and collapse completely. An earth-shattering roar resounded. The platinum sun exploded in the sky, turning into light particles that scattered in all directions. What? The hero was shocked. An attack that could even cut a star was actually cut open? While the hero was still in shock, the comet that heavily hit the platinum sun in the sky suddenly turned and cut through the space. It was as fast as lightning, blowing away the light particles that filled the sky and rushing toward the hero. Only then did the hero react. Looking at the comet that was violently shooting toward him, he quickly raised the divine blade of salvation in his hand. Clang! The crisp sound of metal clashing reverberated clearly in the sky. The holy sword and the divine blade that were blooming with blinding light collided with each other, causing a dazzling flash. Beep, beep, beep. Immediately after, amidst the sound of thunder, the bright electric light on the divine blade surged violently to the holy sword. Chapter 1500. Beep. 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 Amidst the ear-piercing sound of electricity, bolts of lightning exploded on the divine blade of salvation. They were like pythons that instantly slithered onto the holy sword's blade. However, when the bolts of lightning that slithered onto the holy sword's blade came into contact with the brilliant white light of the demon slayer, they evaporated like water vapor and instantly turned into a wisp of green smoke amidst sizzling sounds. Seeing this happen, the hero was also extremely shocked. Even the lightning of salvation is ineffective? I'm sorry, Noah looked up and sneered when he saw the shock in the hero's eyes. My Aster has an extremely powerful ability to break curses. Now that I've fully unleashed my power, I can even break the powers of gods and gods' layers one by one, including the divine blade in your hand. As soon as he finished speaking, Noah suddenly dodged and took a step back. A huge amount of divine power gathered under his feet, and it exploded again. Ultimate sword skill. Primary form purple lightning. Noah, who had just taken a small step back, turned into a bolt of lightning in an instant. The holy sword in his hand, which was glowing with a brilliant white light, pierced towards the hero's chest mercilessly. The hero had no time to be surprised. He almost reflexively dodged to the side. Chi! The lightning-like spike immediately brushed past the side of the brave man's chest, cutting through his clothes and landing in the air. The hero could even clearly feel the cold touch in front of him, proving that the holy sword had pierced through his skin. If the hero's dodge had been even 0.1 second slower, there would have been a gash in front of him. If it had been anyone else in such a thrilling situation, they would have felt a chill in their heart. However, the hero was an expert who had annihilated all the gods' layers since ancient times. He felt his heart tighten, and a burst of violent lightning erupted from his body. Clang! Although the burst of lightning did not reach the silver holy sword, it bounced the holy sword away from the hero's body. Then, the hero took a step forward and raised the divine blade in his hand. Like a windmill dancing in the wind, he heavily slashed toward Noah's waist. Clang! This time, it was Noah's turn to raise the holy sword in his hand. With a crisp sound, he blocked the divine blade's heavy slash. As the saying goes, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and violence for violence. As if intending to return the favor, Noah also made the crimson dragon's shadow on his body soar, causing the airwave that turned into air scales to be like a shockwave, blasting it away. Bang! Amidst the muffled sounds, the hero was struck by the crimson shockwave and was sent flying. However, at that moment, the hero kicked Noah in the chest. Bang! With the same muffled sound, Noah, who had ignited his air scales, could not block the hero's kick. He was sent flying. Thus, one was sent flying by the air scales, while the other was sent flying by the kick. Noah and the hero were both sent flying, creating a sharp sound that reverberated in the sky. It did not dissipate for a long time. However, almost at the same time, Noah and the hero steadied themselves and looked up. Their eyes met in the air, and sparks flew. Then, Noah and the hero both stomped on the void and shot out like bullets. They swung their holy sword and divine blade at each other. Clang! The crisp sound of collision was mixed with a shock wave that spread out like a ripple. Clang, 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 clang. In the sky, two figures crisscrossed each other like two bolts of lightning chasing after each other. As they flashed and flew, they collided with each other frequently, causing the sound of steel colliding to spread out like water ripples. It also set off waves of shocking wind ripples, causing people to be terrified just by looking at them. Looking from afar, one could only see two meteors chasing each other. Sometimes they wandered in the sky. Sometimes they collided ruthlessly. Sometimes they flashed through space. Sometimes they intertwined with each other. Under such circumstances, the holy sword and the divine saber clashed repeatedly, causing the crisp sounds of clashing to resound through the sky. At the same time, they also cut through the air. Every time they clashed, the surrounding atmosphere would become chaotic, and their momentum could not be said to be small. As a result, after a round of confrontation, the hero who was attacking the Demon King and the Demon King who was attacking the hero were evenly matched. Neither side could do anything to the other. In terms of physical strength, Noah and the hero were actually on par. Noah had the blessing of ability value that was about to be promoted to LV6. In terms of physical strength, he was not inferior to a god. The hero was the strongest, steel, so his physical strength was naturally extraordinary. He was not inferior to Noah at all. In terms of weapons, Noah had the holy sword that even the elf king was afraid of, and the hero had the divine blade that could even cut a star. In terms of the level of strength, Noah's incarnation of the Dragon Emperor had multiplied to the limit, and the hero had also used the ancient covenant to increase the strength equivalent to 7 god slayers. In terms of defense, Noah had the air scale protection, and the hero also had the thunder lightning protection. In terms of skills, Noah's sword skills were superb, and the hero was not inferior to Noah. In this way, the two of them were naturally on par with each other. Of course, Noah could also use 2 incarnations to fight at the same time. However, at present, Noah had already used the dragon sun's sovereignty to strengthen his physical strength, and not to strengthen his spirit. Once he used 2 incarnations, without the dragon sun's sovereignty to strengthen his spirit, even if Noah could bear the burden of using 2 incarnations at the same time, he could not guarantee how long he could bear the burden of using 2 incarnations. And if the dragon sun's sovereignty was used to strengthen his spirit, Noah's strength would be reduced by more than half in an instant. In that case, without the support of enough divine power, Aster's true strength would not be able to be displayed. At that time, the divine blade that could cut a star would become a threat. Therefore, unless it was the most critical moment, casually using the power of 2 incarnations would only lead to one's death. Until the time came to determine the outcome of the battle, Noah had to hide this trump card with a time limit. Clang! Another heavy sound of steel colliding rang out. The 2 figures that had turned into 2 meteors chasing each other passed by each other, retreating rapidly in the ripples of the strong wind. Their eyes were fixed on each other, not moving for a moment. In a battle of such intensity, it would only take a moment to shift one's gaze away from one's opponent, and one would be forced into a desperate situation. Therefore, Noah and the hero had their eyes fixed on each other. Their eyes were filled with seriousness and light. At that moment, the hero's face froze all of a sudden. He flipped his hand, and a golden disc appeared in his hand. Noah's eyes focused as he looked at the disc. Of course, Noah would not forget about the disc. It was the god relic that stored the sword god's summoning authority called the arrowhead disc. It seemed like after Guinevere's death, the god relic had returned to its rightful owner, the hero. After all, the sword god's summoning authority stored in the god relic was the hero's authority. No matter if it was Noah or the hero, both of them had their eyes on the arrowhead disc at that moment. Then, both of them noticed something. 2 brand new sword seals slowly appeared on the disc and were imprinted on it. The hero fell silent for a moment as he looked at the 2 sword seals that were slowly appearing. Both of them had been defeated. Noah understood what was going on when he heard that. Lancelot and the masked wind god had been defeated by Luo Hao and Yerek. However, that was not good news. The reason being, Lancelot and the masked wind god's godheads must have been absorbed by the arrowhead disc. Therefore, one could already foresee what would happen next. Just like how Noah was hiding his trump card, the hero was hiding his trump card as well. It seems like I can't drag this on any longer. The hero looked at Noah. Although it's a little unfair, this disc is also my authority and my power. So, please forgive me. The golden disc flashed with a bright light as soon as he was done speaking. In the next second, 4 silhouettes appeared around the hero out of thin air. Noah's expression turned grim when he saw that. Chapter 1501. Looking at the group of people who appeared out of thin air around the hero and surrounded him as if they wanted to protect him, Noah could not help but be speechless. The 4 of them could be regarded as Noah's acquaintances. One of them was a handsome man riding on a winged celestial horse. One was ape deity who was riding on a golden cloud. One was a knight riding on a handsome white horse. One was wind god, who was surrounded by whirlwinds and was covered in bandages. He also wore a mask on his face. Perseus. Great sage, heaven's equal. Lancelot. Masked wind god. The group of 4 gods of disobedience surrounded the hero and cast their gazes on Noah. Godslayer. Perseus revealed a smile that was as refreshing as the sun. We meet again. I didn't expect that I would have the chance to fight with you again. Great sage, heaven's equal laughed heartily. It couldn't be better. As expected, I was resurrected along with him. Lancelot spun the long spear in his hand and spoke with some helplessness and some joy. It's a little despicable for a dead person to use this method to come back to life, but there's no other way. Apart from being an invincible warrior, I'm also a servant who protects my master. Let me fulfill my duty as well. Only masked wind god looked at Noah silently. In order to protect the secret of the hero, he firmly pursued the doctrine of mysticism. Waves of powerful curse power surged out from the gods, and like invisible waves, they spread out in layers. Noah's excellent sensing ability allowed him to clearly feel the powerful curse power surging from the 4 gods of disobedience, including Perseus, Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, Lancelot, and Masked Wind God. Almost every wave of curse power was 100 times stronger than that of an ordinary magician or conjurer. However, it was precisely because of this that Noah frowned slightly. It was not because the curse power of the 4 gods of disobedience was too strong. On the contrary, the curse power that surged from Perseus, Great Sage equaling Heaven, Lancelot, and the masked wind god was much weaker than before. This result made Noah's heart skip a beat. Could it be, as expected, I can't hide anything from you? The hero had been observing Noah's performance, and when he saw the surprise on his face, he sighed. Although I have the power to resurrect my own kind and summon steel again, this power is not without limits. The strength of the steel generals that you resurrected has decreased, right? Noah nodded in understanding. That's right. That makes sense. Otherwise, if you could resurrect your dead brethren in their complete states, you could gather combat power and annihilate the Godslayer with sheer numbers. There's no need for any ancient treaty or the divine blade of salvation. You're right, the hero admitted. If only one is resurrected, then his strength can be restored to its peak. However, if there are more of them, the power will be dispersed. In their current state, they probably only have 70% of their strength when they were alive, right? Noah's gaze swept across the gods that were supporting the hero, 70% of their strength, but there are 4 more of them. It's a very useful power, isn't it? That's why I'm using this power. The hero nodded solemnly, and then his gaze swept across the 4 gods of disobedience around him. Everyone, please lend me your power. You want to use my power to conquer the Demon King? My savior. Perseus pulled out his saber from his waist in a forthright manner. Although I don't like to be ordered around, there's no other way in this situation. Old son, I have no objections. Great Sage equaling heaven flipped his hand, and the Rui Jingu Bang appeared in his hand. Since you've given me a chance to kill my enemy, then I'll lend you some of my power. Wielding a spear for my lord is Lancelot's long-cherished wish, Lancelot declared loudly. To be able to run at full speed once again, I'm satisfied. Masked Wind God clenched his fist without saying a word, causing the whirlwind around him to become even more violent. At this moment, the 4 gods of steel locked their hostility on Noah. Looking at Noah, who was holding the silver holy sword, the hero spoke in a low voice. Don't hate me. As soon as he finished speaking. What are you waiting for? Great Sage equaling heaven shouted. Do it. As soon as he finished speaking, the 4 gods of steel suddenly shot out. Almost at the same time, Noah retreated without hesitation, trying his best to distance himself from the 4 gods of disobedience. However, that was meaningless. This was because Excellency Ape, who was stepping on a golden cloud, and Wind God, whose body was surging with a storm, had released the power of seraphic speed at the first moment. With a terrifying speed that no one could match, they turned into phantoms and flashed in front of Noah in an instant. God Slayer. Great Sage equaling heaven shouted loudly. Have a taste of the power of old son's Rui Jingu Bang. Before he could finish his sentence, the Great Sage equaling heaven's steel rod, which weighed 13,500 pounds, was like a heavy mountain. With a swing, it was aimed at Noah's head. At the same time, Masked Wind God also raised a huge fist, which was swirling with a whirlwind to the extreme. Like a cannonball, it was heavily aimed at Noah's chest. The power of the steel rod and the fist shook the air, causing a heavy sonic boom to sound in the air. Even if such a blow landed on steel, it would be able to shatter it in an instant. Looking at the steel rod and the fist, which contained terrible power, smashing towards him, Noah finally had to take it seriously. I am the strongest, and I hold all victory in my hands. Whether it is a human or a demon, I am the one who defeats the hostility of all enemies. I will defeat any enemy that is in my way. The holy words of the God of Victory, who was always victorious, turned into a spirit of speech, causing all the divine power that were sleeping in Noah's energy source to boil. Bang! The red air scales that covered Noah's whole body suddenly rose, like a dragon-shaped armor, protecting Noah in it. Dong! The steel rod and the heavy fist fell on the red air scales, causing a circle of ripples. At this time, Perseus, who was riding on the back of the celestial horse, and Lancelot, who was riding on the back of the white horse, had somehow circled behind Noah and galloped towards him. Don't forget about me. I can finally fight with you. I have been waiting for this day for a long time. With extremely passionate shouts, Perseus and Lancelot whipped their horses and charged towards Noah's back at an extremely fast speed. Swoosh! The sword in Perseus' hand cut through the wind and slashed towards Noah's neck in an extremely heroic manner. Whoosh! The long spear in Lancelot's hand pierced out explosively, piercing towards Noah's back amidst the sharp sound of the air being torn apart. Feeling the strong wind coming from behind, Noah was just about to react when another piercing sound resounded in front of him. 3 arrows turned into flaming light beams and streaked across the sky. At an extremely tricky angle, they brushed past the bodies of the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal and the Masked Wind God, who were blocking in front of Noah, and shot towards Noah. That arrow was shot by the brave warrior who was guarding the rear with his longbow. Furthermore, each and every one of those arrows contained the power of the ancient covenant. Noah had reason to believe that those arrows could break through the air scales on his body. At that time, the attacks of Perseus, the great sage, heaven's equal, Lancelot, and the masked wind god would all fall on Noah and kill him. This made Noah somewhat angry. "Don't be too arrogant." The silver holy sword that was held tightly in Noah's hands suddenly shone brightly. Ultimate sword skill. Form 3 Dance of the Shadow Moon. A full moon suddenly expanded like a crescent arc. With Noah's sudden rotation, it suddenly appeared and swept towards the surroundings. Clang! The sudden appearance of the moonlight heavily bounced off the attacks of the 4 disobedient gods and sent the people surrounding Noah flying. Chapter 1502. Oh. Wah. Goo. Under the moonlight Perseus, the great sage, heaven's equal, Lancelot, and the masked wind god all let out miserable cries as they were sent flying in 4 different directions. Whoosh! However, the 3 flaming arrows shot by the hero still shot straight towards Noah's throat, heart, and abdomen, landing on the air scales on Noah's body. Bang! With a muffled explosion, the 3 flaming arrows, which were supported by the power of the ancient covenant, suddenly exploded the air scales on Noah's body, causing the crimson dragon's shadow that overlapped on Noah's body to disappear, revealing his body. With the disappearance of the crimson dragon's silhouette, the torrential energy flowing through Noah's body abruptly weakened and finally disappeared. That power was multiplied by the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear. Relying on this multiplied power, Noah was able to compete with the hero, who was supported by the ancient covenant and had the power of 7 godslayers. Now, the multiplied power had all disappeared, allowing Noah to return to his normal state. However, that was to be expected. The crimson dragon's shadow on Noah's body was originally the product of the fusion of the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear's balance breaker and the Dragon Emperor's incarnation's chi scale. Originally, the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear, balance breaker, was supposed to be a crimson red full-body armor. However, after the fusion with Noah's Dragon Emperor incarnation, the balance breaker of the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear also fused with the air scales. After the gas scales fused with the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear, balance breaker, the result was that the crimson full-body armor turned into a crimson gaseous armor. Now that the crimson dragon's shadow had been destroyed, it was equivalent to the balance breaker effect of the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear being destroyed as well. Naturally, the increased power would disappear. Feeling that the powerful aura on Noah's body had decreased several times in an instant, the hero with the longbow immediately ordered. Now! Perseus, the great sage, heaven's equal, Lancelot, and the masked wind god, who were sent flying by the moonlight instantly increased the power of the curse in their bodies. Then, the 4 of them stabilized their bodies and once again charged in the direction of Noah. The 4 gods of disobedience who were sent flying in 4 different directions suddenly rushed in from all directions and surrounded Noah. He believed that as long as the 4 gods of disobedience got close, they would launch the fiercest attack at the same time. At that time, even if Lancelot and the others only had 70% of their peak strength left, without the multiplied power of the Dragon Emperor and without the protection of the Dragon Emperor's air scales, the best outcome for Noah would be to be a serious injury. Once the air scales were broken, a buffer period would be needed to recover. At this time, Noah could not immediately use the multiplied power and air scales ability. However, that did not mean that Noah could not use the power of the other incarnations. I, with my violent heart, tightly cover the sky. I declare, roll up a storm for me, rain for me, and never allow you to disobey my orders. In the depths of Noah's heart, the image representing the storm lit up. Dong! Accompanied by a thunderous sound, a storm shook out from Noah's body and turned into the most violent tornado. Like a shock wave, it blew in all directions at an extremely fast speed. Perseus, great sage equaling heaven, Lancelot, and the masked wind god who were charging toward Noah were all shocked. But it was too late to react at this time. The violent tornado completely engulfed the 4 gods of disobedience. Bang! At this time, a crimson wave of air rose from Noah's body and turned into a dragon's shadow that overlapped with his body. The air scales were finally restored. At this moment, Noah finally used 2 incarnations at the same time. On the crimson dragon's shadow, the precious gems began to emit voices, allowing the multiplied power to be channeled into the violent tornado that was stirred up by the tremors. The violent tornado suddenly trembled, and its color gradually turned red. Like a volcanic eruption, it caused an incomparably ferocious and terrifying power to fluctuate in the wind. The sudden increase in power of the tornado instantly turned into the most brutal power, and every gust of wind became a heavy pressure. The 4 gods of disobedience were swallowed by the tornado. Before they could even scream, they were instantly crushed by the terrifying power of the tornado, leaving not a trace of flesh behind. What? The hero's expression finally changed abruptly. At this moment, the crimson storm howled and expanded like a giant tornado, rushing in the direction of the hero. The hero's expression changed again and again, and he hurriedly manipulated the spirit supporting his body. Like a fallen leaf in a gust of wind, he retreated rapidly with the help of the gust of wind to avoid the terrifying tornado that was roaring toward him. However, with the multiplied power of the Dragon Emperor, the strength of the storm incarnation increased by too much. Therefore, the terrifying crimson tornado expanded faster and faster, and it didn't take long for it to catch up with the hero. Hiya! The hero, who couldn't avoid it, could only shout. He raised the divine blade of salvation in his hand and tightly gripped the hilt with both hands. Then, he slashed down heavily at the tornado that was sweeping toward him. Clang! The light of salvation bloomed on the divine blade of salvation. The blade, which could even cut stars in half, was like a flash of light as it slashed through the outer wall of the tornado. Poochie! With a tearing sound, the tornado that could be easily crushed by Perseus, the great sage, heaven's equal, Lancelot, and the masked wind god was actually split in half by the divine blade of salvation. However, the hero didn't feel any joy at all. His pupils suddenly shrank to the size of needles. Amidst the piercing sound of something breaking through the air, a figure shot out from the storm that had been split in half. Like an arrow that had been released from a bow, the figure rushed in front of the hero. You! The hero's eyes widened. There, Noah's dark and deep eyes flashed with a fierce light. He raised the holy sword in his hand and mercilessly slashed down at the hero. Looking at the sharp blade that was getting closer and closer, the hero shouted again at the critical moment. His body surged with bright electric light. Poochie! With a crisp tearing sound, Noah's sword split the dazzling electric light that burst from the hero's body, just like how the hero had cut the tornado in half. Then, looking at the hero whose pupils shrank, Noah suddenly clenched his fists. Giant that blots out the sky supports the world with his hand. I will let this divine power flow into my body. From now on, I will display the ultimate power that no one can match. At this moment, among the powers of Noah's 10 incarnations, the most powerful one, the giant, flashed with light. The power that could split mountains and seas instantly filled Noah's body. There was no hesitation. Noah's arms suddenly shook, and he blasted a fist with terrifying power at the hero. Bam! A deafening sound that made one's heart tremble exploded in the sky. Poochie! The terrifying power caused the hero to spit out a mouthful of blood. His entire chest was smashed, and his body was like a broken piece of trash. He hung down powerlessly and fell from the high clouds to the ground with the help of gravity. Chapter 1503. Shio! High up in the clouds, the sound of a meteor crashing resounded. A figure was like a kite with a broken string, penetrating through the clouds and turning into a meteorite that created sparks due to friction with the air. It fell back down at a terrifying speed that was above the speed of sound. In the end, the figure that turned into a meteorite heavily smashed into a beach. Bang! In the loud muffled explosion, a corner of the beach stirred up a thick cloud of sand, mixed with a violent impact wind, violently spreading in all directions. At this time, Noah finally descended from the sky and landed on the beach. Ugh! Just as he landed on the beach, Noah's face showed traces of pain, causing him to involuntarily hold his head and let out a painful groan. This was caused by using two avatars at the same time, which caused his mind to bear an excessive burden. It was just as Noah had expected. Without the blessing of the dragon sun sovereign, using two avatars at the same time, even if the physical burden could be completely ignored with the ability value that was about to reach LV6, the mental burden was not. At this time, Noah felt like a live iron rod drilled into his head, very uncomfortable. Seeing Noah's appearance, Aster's voice involuntarily rang in Noah's mind. "Master, I'm fine." Noah held his head, took a deep breath, and said so. Fortunately, using two avatars at the same time did not take a long time. It was just a little painful, but the burden was not too big. Aster, who was connected to Noah's mind, could easily sense that Noah was not lying, so he was relieved. Noah, who felt the pain slightly lessen, let out a sigh of relief, raised his head, and looked forward. There, the thick sand and dust that accompanied the shockwave began to gradually dissipate, revealing the scene within the sand and dust. A huge crater sat in the sand and dust, with gravel and stones rolling inside. In the middle of the crater, the hero lay there, spitting out mouthfuls of blood. The hero seemed to want to stand up, but did not succeed. This was because he couldn't even move a single finger. He took a closer look. The warrior's chest had caved in completely. That was definitely a fatal wound. It was a fatal wound that even a god could not escape. After all, even though Noah did not reveal himself and was unable to display the full power of the giant form, with the support of the giant form, Noah's full power attack was something that even 16 knights, who had broken the rules of the physical ability of the giant form, would not be able to match. Even a mountain would crumble in an instant after being hit by such a blow, let alone a body. Even though the hero was a god, being hit by such a blow was undoubtedly a fatal blow. Rather, it would be more accurate to say that the brave warrior was still able to struggle at death's door even when his chest was completely caved in. His vitality was already very tenacious. However, there was no doubt. The brave ones could no longer fight. Cough, cough. The warrior coughed up blood continuously. Due to his heavy injuries, he was unable to move at all. However, the warrior gritted his teeth and raised his head to look in Noah's direction. Noah met the hero's gaze and remained silent. Under such circumstances, the hero tried his best to squeeze out a smile. "This time, I have indeed lost." The hero's voice was extremely weak. It was so weak that if the wind was slightly stronger and the distance was slightly further, it would have been impossible to hear. However, Noah heard it clearly. He heard the hero's words. "But, this is only temporary." The hero stared at Noah closely. "I will be back," leaving behind this sentence. It was unclear whether it was advice or a warning. The hero slowly closed his eyes and lowered his head. The next moment, the hero's body flashed with a platinum light and turned into the shape of a sword. Clang! With a crisp sound, the sword that was blooming with platinum light fell from mid-air and the tip of the sword was embedded in the ground. That was naturally the divine blade of salvation. Noah furrowed his brows tightly as he looked at the divine saber that was stuck in the pit. The blade was radiating platinum light. It was not until this moment that Noah finally remembered. Athena had once said that the brave had an extremely powerful immortality. Even if he defeated the hero would only transform into the divine blade and enter a dormant state. In a few months, or as long as a few years, the hero would revive and wake up from his dormant state. When that happened, Noah would have to face this troublesome hero again. "Aster," Noah said with a frown. "Can you cut that divine blade in half?" "I'm not sure." Aster's voice sounded in Noah's mind again. "However, I don't feel like I can cut it in half, so there shouldn't be a way." "There shouldn't be a way?" Noah's frown deepened. Even if I use the incarnation of the Dragon Emperor to increase your power, it still won't work? I don't think so. It was rare for Aster to say something without confidence. Although I don't know the nature of the sword, as a sword spirit, I can feel that it's immortal. Noah's tightly furrowed brows immediately loosened, and a troubled expression appeared on his face. In reality, Noah had already guessed that. After all, immortal god relics were not rare at all. Back then, wasn't Noah also unable to destroy the Holy Grail and retrieve the world fragment from it? That sacred magic tool was an undying and indestructible type. Since even the Holy Grail, which was created for the sake of the brave, was immortal, then it was not strange that the divine blade of salvation, which was known as the strongest divine relic, could be immortal and indestructible, which was formed from countless weapons given to the brave by the gods of the heavenly realm. Otherwise, if the divine blade could be easily destroyed, the hero would not have been able to successfully kill the demon king and complete his mission. Could it be that there was no way to deal with the divine blade of salvation? Just when Noah was feeling helpless, a voice rang in his mind. I've told you that you can't defeat that man. The voice did not belong to Aster. Noah was startled for a moment, and then he was surprised. Athena? You're awake? Even if an immortal snake goes into hibernation, it will wake up in spring, Athena said calmly and arrogantly. With this characteristic, I've decided to wake up before I went into hibernation. It's either when you're killed by that man or when you're defeated by him. I'll only wake up when these two times arrive. Is that so? Noah forced a smile. What can you do even if you wake up? I can't pretend that I didn't hear you. Athena's voice was cold and there was a hint of dissatisfaction in it. Are you saying that this concubine can't be of any use? Noah was stunned when he heard that. His eyes lit up immediately. Do you have a way to destroy the divine blade? However, Athena poured a bucket of cold water on him. No, that displeasing steel cannot be destroyed. Even if you were able to defeat the hero, it would still be the same. That being said, Athena's tone changed again. However, if you want to get rid of that man, you don't need to destroy the divine blade. You don't need to destroy the divine blade? Noah quickly asked. Then what should I do? I've thought about this problem before, but after I fused with you, this problem was solved. Athena said. After becoming one with you, I was able to see your life from the depths of your heart. Noah's eyes widened. Did Athena see my life? Doesn't that mean, as if she saw through Noah's thoughts? Athena laughed out loud. Should I say that you're the one who transcends the world? Or the lucky one who is protected by the world? Even though I'm the goddess of wisdom, I didn't expect you to be such an existence. No wonder you're my fated one. As expected. Athena knew all of Noah's secrets. Thanks to you, I saw the hope of defeating that man. Athena's words were shocking. Noah Dole, turn me into the steel that saves the world. Chapter 1504. For a moment, Noah even wondered if he had heard wrongly. However, Athena's indifferent tone dispelled Noah's doubts. Turn me into the taboo steel. This way, the man's mission will be ended by you. Wait. Wait. Noah hurriedly shouted for him to stop. He took a deep breath and calmed down the astonishment in his heart before asking, What are you doing? You said that I will turn you into the divine sword of salvation? I know what you're thinking. Athena's tone didn't change at all. She was still as calm as ever. But you did not hear wrongly. I will turn into the steel of salvation and help you defeat the hero. Even if you say that, I still don't understand. Noah directly asked. What is going on? It is actually very simple. If you think about it carefully, you will understand. Athena did not keep Noah in suspense and answered Noah's question very straightforwardly. The divine sword is an existence that is integrated with the man. Therefore, once the man dies, he will turn into the divine sword and fall into a deep slumber. Then, as long as the divine sword is destroyed, the man will naturally not be able to awaken and will fall into eternal slumber. He will return to the myth and be defeated by you. Unfortunately, the divine sword is indestructible. Athena said. If that is the case, then there is no need to destroy the divine sword. Just kill the man who is the object of the divine sword. The divine sword that was integrated with the hero was equivalent to the hero himself. After all, the so-called God of Steel originally referred to the living God of Swords. This way of saying that the sword that was originally made of steel had the appearance of a human and also a soul. Just like the monsters mentioned in many TV dramas, they were originally just animals, plants, or even something else, but they cultivated into a human body. It was the same principle. In other words, the current hero was equivalent to being beaten back to his original state. Although the body turned into the divine sword and fell into a deep slumber, the hero's soul was still in the divine sword. I am the dark goddess in charge of the underworld. Toying with souls is also my domain. That is why I was able to abandon my previous body and become one with you, Athena explained. Right now, I am in a state where only my soul is left. As long as I can fuse with the divine blade and expel the soul of the man sleeping in the divine blade, wouldn't that be enough? Become one with the divine blade? Noah asked in disbelief. Can that kind of thing be done? Of course not, Athena said without hesitation. I am the goddess of the earth, not the god of swords. In the end, I am an existence that is incompatible with the god of swords. How could I possibly possess the body of the god of swords and turn myself into steel? After saying that, Athena suddenly changed her mind. However, I have read your life story from the depths of your heart, and know the existence of the steel in your hands. Hearing this, Noah could not help but lower his head and look at the demon slayer in his hands. The steel in your hands is not a god, but a so-called spirit. Athena's voice slowly sounded in Noah's heart. After knowing about this existence that is similar to steel, I thought that since I could not become the god of swords, then I would turn myself into a sword spirit and become one with the divine sword that saved the world. That way, I would be able to expel the soul of that man. What? Noah was really stunned. You want to become a sword spirit? That's right, Athena said proudly. That man's servant was also the goddess of the earth in the past. Through death, she fell and became the god of swords. I only need to do the same thing. Noah could not wrap his head around it. Become a sword spirit? That kind of thing can be done. Are you doubting my wisdom? Athena seemed to have seen through Noah's thoughts and laughed coldly. Although the time was a little short, during the period of my deep sleep, this concubine has already created a secret technique to transform into a spirit. Relying on this secret technique, this concubine can transform into a so-called spirit. At that time, as long as I successfully assimilate with the divine blade, this concubine will transform into a sword spirit. The success rate is more or less guaranteed. Athena suddenly changed the topic of conversation. Of course, if it's just like this, then there is no way to assimilate the divine sword. You must cut off the connection between the divine sword and that man. Fortunately, you have the sword of spiritual speech that can even cut off divinity. With that sword, it is not a problem to cut off the connection between the divine sword and the hero. Now, I will pass on the knowledge of that man to you. As soon as she finished speaking, a large amount of knowledge flashed in Noah's mind. In India, there were two famous epics that were known as the oldest epics. One of them was called Mahabharata. The other one was called Ramayana. These two epics were the foundation of Indian culture and had a considerable role in enlightening the development of Indian literature and religion. A large part of Indian mythology was related to the stories recorded in Ramayana and Mahabharata. For example, the main character of Ramayana, Rama. In the box, as one of the three supreme gods in Indian mythology, the 10th incarnation of Vishnu, Galgi, once had a dispute with Noah. The main character of Ramayana, Rama, was the 7th incarnation of Vishnu. In the story of Ramayana, it was said that in the human world, there was a powerful demon named Luobona. Luobona ruled a race called Rakshasa. It was a type of evil spirit that specialized in eating human flesh. It was a true demon. Therefore, the leader of this demon race, Luobona, was called the Rakshasa king, the king of demons, and was called the demon king by people. Luobona had the special characteristic of not being hurt by gods and demons other than mortals. Other than humans, other races, be it gods or demons, could not leave a mark on his body. In order to destroy this demon king, the gods of heaven sought the help of Vishnu. Therefore, Vishnu descended from heaven and became a human, reincarnated into a human, and became the king of Bisara, the son of the 10 chariots king, and also the prince of Bisara. This prince was Rama. However, this prince's life was quite bumpy. He suffered from the conspiracy of his stepbrother, and was exiled abroad, wandering for more than 14 years. The only people who accompanied this tragic prince wandering abroad were the prince's wife, Siddhartha, and his brother, Rashmana. Later, Rama and the other two wandered to the forest occupied by the Rakshasa race who had committed many evil deeds, and started a battle with the Rakshasa. The brave Rama defeated many Rakshasas one after another. In the end, the demon king of the Rakshasa race, Luobona, appeared. Even the gods were helpless against the demon king, who coveted the beauty of Rama's wife, Siddhartha, and captured her. In order to save his wife, Rama and his brother, Rashmana, embarked on a journey, and rushed to the city where Luobona was. In the process, Rama met a white ape. The white ape's name was Hanuman, and he was the son of the wind god Vayu in Indian mythology. He was also the prototype of the great sage equal to heaven's son Wukong in the famous Chinese novel, Journey to the West. Rama, who got acquainted with the white ape Hanuman, received the help of the son of the wind god. With the help of his younger brother Rashmana and the white ape Hanuman, who followed him, he finally annihilated the demon king Ravana and took back his wife. He returned to the country of Bazar and became the king. In other words, Rama was a hero born to destroy the demon king, and he was also the king who finally succeeded in destroying the demon king. Therefore, he who appeared in the apocalypse was called the last king. Therefore, the gods of heaven gave him the mission of subjugating all the demon kings on earth. Therefore, the masked wind god who followed him was the ape god who had white body hair and could control storms. Therefore, the subordinate god who helped this brave warrior to bear all the distortions and arrogance of the god of disobedience, and was called the younger brother, was Rashmana. That's right. The brave warrior who destroyed the demon king was called Rama. When the name came out from Noah's mouth, in his heart, the stone plate with 10 patterns on the outline suddenly turned and pointed in the direction of the warrior. Clang! A bright golden light flashed in Noah's hand. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.